Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto was trained by Kurama early on in his life, part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. The night was cold in Konoha, but for the ninja that called the village hidden in the leaves their home, it was business as usual. The streets were empty, save for the occasional drunk and beggar. Lights were sparse, and far in between, as most homes were sound asleep at 3 in the morning. The shifting shadows of the Umbu patrol disturbed no one as they made their rounds, keeping watch over the peaceful village. Well, in ideals at least. The faces of 4 Hokages looked over the entirety of the village like titan gargoyles. Their faces unique to the one next to it in both shape and headwear. The 4th face looked the kindest out of the bunch though. A sort of passive mask was etched in the stone, giving the man it was modeled after a look that showed just how much the spiky-haired Kage had treasured the village he had protected. Out of the sea of darkened buildings, only one stood out. At least, only one had stood out to a passing Umbu patrol, leaning fully into the soft embrace of his chair in the Hokage's office. One of the men whose face was carved into the monument overlooking the village sat behind his desk. Sarutobi Hiruzen was shifting through letters and notes, stiffly after being informed by his most trusted ninja, the Umbu captain, of something that had every fiber in his being locked up in anger, and hate, and regret. "You are certain the villagers are the cause?" the old war veteran asked in a hard and tired tone. He really didn't want to believe what he had just heard. Truly wishing that it was just some sick joke that the captain of his Umbu was playing at, hoping that he had just cracked under the pressure of his own life. A kneeling man in an Umbu uniform lifted his head, his dragon mask hiding the entirety of his face with only his gravity-defying gray hair giving any details of his identity. "Leave me alone," the dragon-masked captain recited in a monotone voice. Though Hiruzen could hear the hidden sea of anger lurking just beneath the surface of it. "Go away." The masked shinobi's fists clenched noticeably, and if his hands weren't covered in fingerless gloves, they would without a doubt show quivering white knuckles, not a monster. The gray-haired Umbu let out a silent sigh. Those were just the start of what I could make out on the walls and floors of his room. All of it, written in blood, and not a sight I would mistake. Hiruzen closed his eyes, and swallowed the guilt of a night he would never forget. The two stayed silent, before the tired voice of an equally tired old man barely spoke above a whisper. "Go." Hiruzen didn't need to open his eyes to see the nod that he got in return, and the swift exit that followed. For a while, the Sandame simply sat there, letting the silence of the room engulf him as the gravity of the situation set in. He was a moving statue of emptiness as he got back to the pile of paperwork on his desk that never seemed to end. Turning over pages of reports that he wasn't even retaining as he read them. Over and over again he read through bits and pieces of the titleless papers, putting them down and flipping to the next one without a blink. Each paper he read through, he skimmed each line but registered none of it in his head. For minutes that seemed to be hours, the old man stared numbly at the blurred pages until he finally stopped with a sigh, and was held hostage by himself. He couldn't ignore it anymore, feeling the clawing sense of being watched, and soon found his eyes staring weakly into the framed picture of the Kage who was meant to replace him. The Yondaime. The blonde, spiky-haired man in the picture was an undisputed mirror, albeit a fully grown version of the boy that he had the pained and shame-filled responsibility of personally admitting to Konoha's hospital. In a near-robotic fashion he had the son of one of his most treasured friends placed in his personal medical room to make sure, most regrettably so, that no further harm would come to the boy that had worked his way into the deepest crevices of his long-since battered heart. Hiruzen's face grimaced as he drank in the photo of the young Kage, smiling in the picture, as he hugged his pregnant red-haired wife from behind. "This isn't what you wanted," sighed the now aching leader, "and I've allowed it to come this far." The former mentor of Konoha's revered Yellow Flash forced out with a weighted whisper, the likes of which were only allowed and meant for himself. He was supposed to be a hero to the village, not the village's vent for revenge against the thing that forced you to make your sacrifice. The once calm and collective man who analyzed and planned everything before he so much as stepped in and out of his office, suddenly smashed his desk in splintering halves with a forceful grunt and failed attempt to keep his frustration from reaching the surface. The reality of failing one of the closest friends he ever had and would have was made obvious on his brow, and placed a weight on his shoulders that should have been there from the start. He had allowed his closest friend's child to be tormented to lengths that should never have even been possible. So disgusted with himself was he, that the old veteran couldn't so much as feel the burn of the sake he was now gulping down. A bottle of fine product that he hadn't laid hands on since the day he had bought it. The bottle he was supposed to share with Minato after he and Kushina settled in their home as a family, with their child resting in the nursery they had built in preparation for becoming parents. Furious, he brought a leg up past his shoulders and whipped it down, obliterating one of the newly formed halves of his desk. But he wasn't finished. As soon as he smashed the desk, he spun on the foot he had kicked down and sent the metal lamp that stood next to it flying into a nearby bookcase with a very noticeable dent in the middle, as well as embedding it a good number of inches within the wood. With a few regaining breaths and a brim-filled cup of sake, the now determined man sat back down into his chair and proceeded to rest his wrinkled forehead upon the support of his right palm. "This ends today," signaling the loyal Umbu who instinctively left their lord to his thoughts. The old Kage cursed his title and wished that there hadn't been so much for him to do. For this night could have avoided if not for the destruction left in the nine-tailed fox's wake. That, however, was no excuse. And he knew it. Upon ordering his guards to return, they, without a moment's pause, trailed alongside and behind him as he once again continued to tear at himself with his frustrated and self-loathing thoughts as he made his way to go pay a visit to the hero he was entrusted to watch over. Forgive me, Minato. Kushina, the weary Hokage, entered the Konoha hospital and made for the room that was designated for his personal use. It wasn't supposed to be this way. The sounds of a child's labored breathing and running water could be heard echoing through the empty hall leading to a bathroom. The light from within it flickered on and off as if it were possessed. The walls of the apartment were bare, as were the floorings. Even the bedroom only had a single mattress with a ruffled blanket crowded at the foot of it. What would be the living room only held a single coffee table, and a chair that was thrown off to the side with only a single leg. The door to the entrance of the small one-bedroom apartment was sealed shut. 2 of the missing chair legs were nailed into it, and the section of wall beside it, keeping the door from being opened. The other was being used in an attempt to barricade the only window in the somewhat spacious room, going across the shattered panel of glass from one bottom corner to the top. It was all done poorly, and red finger and handprints stained much of the surface of the legs, windowsill, and door. Footprints of the same red rust-like color littered the ground, as if someone had been pacing around aimlessly. Though if one took a closer look, the faded murky footprints were much too small to be that of an adult. A harsh gasp hissed from out of the bathroom, and a small frail figure emerged from the room. The dim light of the old light bulb flickered in and out still, but revealed a floor-smeared and seeming flooded floor coated with a thick crimson liquid, and the small frail body left a print behind with each bare step. Hic stupid. A boy no older than 5 years of age stumbled down the hall, his body fumbling from one wall to the other, as he kept losing his balance, and tripping over his feet, carelessly slipping on the remnants of the blood that he was trailing from the bottom of his feet, and leaving crimson streaks along the walls where his hands were being dragged on them to keep himself steady. Why won't they just hick me aloe ** cough * any? The boy clenched his head in agony, his wrists and forearms showing many jagged cuts that were starting to scab over, and other blood-stained lines depicting areas that he had cut before, but were now healed over without a mark. Demon! The boy shuddered as his eyes darted across the empty space in front of him, quivering in instant horror. And no, he muttered weakly. Murderer! His body was quivering now, with his shaking legs just barely able to keep him up. I am Naruto, he protested aloud. I'm not a murderer. The voices of the villagers had come back. They'd been plaguing his thoughts for a while now. Beatings, shunning, and name-calling. The whole bit. Now though, he couldn't even escape the hell of his life in his dreams anymore. The villagers had found a way to torment him in them too. You damn demon brat, get out of my store! Tears were streaming down his face, making the dried blood that was smeared on his cheeks and chin drip down along with the small liquid trails coming out of his eyes. I am Uzumaki Naruto, he wasn't a demon. He didn't do anything wrong. He sniffed again as his breathing became erratic. The image of a man holding a thick piece of wood approached him, and his head snapped to the side as he turned his body with the blow he received, only to be sent down to the floor by another image that had appeared behind him, with his legs still sticking out in front of him. I won't disgrace this home with your presence. It's because of you that the orphanage doesn't have any more room. Naruto curled into a ball, and clenched the rusty kunai tight in his trembling hands. I didn't do anything, he cried out, and shielded his head from the incoming blows of the villagers. An older man who was missing an arm kicked him in the face. You killed my daughter, he yelped in pain from the blow. I didn't. A young teenager with a Konoha headband stomped on his stomach. You killed my sister. He choked out the air in his lungs as he hugged his midsection. And no, a man with burn marks on his face and neck kicked him on the side of the head with enough force to make him flip the other way. You killed my family. More images started to crowd around him. Everywhere he looked, all he could see were the hateful eyes of the villagers, and faces turned into snarls of rage as more and more closed in on him. Their voices melded together into a roar that he could hardly make out. All he could hear in his head was you. A little girl holding her toy away from him protectively glared at him. You! A rebellious-looking teen smirked as he watched Naruto pick himself up from the floor, just like he did when he had pushed him down the flight of stairs at the park. You! His head was bleeding after being hit with a large rock, and the woman that he had asked for help looked at him for only a second before turning around, completely denying that he even existed. You! They were in his face now, prying Naruto's little hands away from his eyes, forcing him to take in all of their hate, punching, kicking and cursing his name at the top of their voices. Finally, his eyes flashed red and his pupils turned to slits as he raised the rusty kunai up in reverse. You! Fire seemed to shoot through his veins as his vision blurred, and the only thing he could feel now was anger. His small heart thundered in his chest, the adrenaline flowing through his body making him numb to everything but the ones doing harm to him. I didn't do anything. His voice a menacing growl that should not be able to come out of a child's body. Naruto plunged the rusted blade into the hand that was hitting him and pinned it to the ground, making sure he could hear the opposing limb hitting the floor with force. The voices stopped, and the villagers disappeared. And then nothing. Silence engulfed the apartment as Naruto's harsh panting slowed, and gazed down to see that the hand that he had stabbed was his own. His eyes shook, still glowing red as he stared at his hand dumbly, before he could hear the voices of the villagers coming again. Fearing another onslaught coming, he clenched the kunai tighter, and dragged the blade down. Ray-a-a-a dash! Gasp! Naruto awoke, with a terrified intake of air. His small heart beating erratically as he woke up expecting a fist, or at least a rock to be flying his way. His body felt tired. Exhausted. And his head felt like it had a hot nail going through the middle as he gripped the sides of his skull in pain. The echoing sound of dripping water filled his ears, and Naruto's young mind slowed to a standstill, as he felt the moisture of warm liquid underneath him. He was there again, the part that lay within him that he had visited multiple times over the duration of his escape. This time, though, it was different. It wasn't like it had been before, where it was as if he were floating outside of his body and looking on into black nothingness. No, this time he was there. The smell of calm and subtly shifting water reached his child's nose and threatened to go in it with each time he bobbed in the warm water. A sort of peace befell him, as if there were no way anything could hurt him so long as he lay still and let the water he was floating in hold him up, as would an equally calm lake or pond hold up a leaf. But something else was different about this place. He couldn't quite pin it down. Vibrations in the once still water alerted him to a presence, and the sound of shifting movement perked his ears. Subtle to the point as if there were an invisible wind playfully weaving through the leaves of a tree, the young boy found himself listening to the sound of a deep turbulence, the likes of which he had heard before, coming from himself at any given time he so chose to listen. It was the drawing and release of breath. The simple and most unthought of action one could make. Except this one was different, for it was not his own. The breathing he was hearing didn't seem too far away, but the length of time it took for a single breath to be drawn made whatever it was that was breathing seem limitless in size. Naruto knew that whatever the breathing belonged to, it was big enough to make him appear minuscule in comparison. That much was clear. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity spent laying there, Naruto started to pick himself up, as if rising from the ground for the first time in his life, and taking another age for him to find his feet. Naruto finally stood up. Steadily, as if expecting something, or someone to appear before him that he hadn't met for a very long time. The whole thing was strange to the blonde. The expectance was something he hadn't yet experienced, and would find that what followed next would be something that he would never forget, something that he would never wish to forget. The deep and warm breathing sounded out once more as the small, and now ant-like boy, when compared to the behemoth that dwelled not too far for comfort from him, began to turn his head to take in the both majestic and petrifying sight that waited not 1 foot behind gargantuan iron bars. The pillar-like beams of metal seemed to disappear into the distance of the forever going black that he could only assume was the ceiling of whatever place he was in. Azure blue eyes met blood red as they seemed to peer into his very soul, his very source of being, and with a final exhale of breath, pushed his expressionless mask back and replaced it with a look of shock that could stop the largest boulder from free falling to the earth if it were caught in his gaze. "So, you've finally come." A deep, mountainous voice bellowed out like gentle thunder, and made his whole body thrum in tune with each word spoken. "As I have been expecting you to make my acquaintance." A massive body slowly emerged into dim, but well enough view for the wide-eyed Uzumaki to see perfectly within the darkness of the titan-sized cage. Piercing crimson-red eyes gained a rim of black fur, and the rest of the hidden figure was revealed to be a body of orange fur of monstrous proportions with a red tint. The upper portion consisted of a very human-like torso that turned into that of a regular fox past the midsection, and ended at the swishing of 9, equally sized if not larger in length, fox tails that seemed to carelessly sway from side to side. Their nonchalant sway looked as if they were all moving for the sake of just moving. All in all, the being behind the gate was a force of nature in pure size alone. A fox, the likes of which only heard in bedtime and scary stories, lay outstretched in front of the 5-year-old boy, who could do nothing but stare back with eyes wide enough to be mistaken as diner plates. The Kyubi no Yoko, the bijou whose name would set off any alarm within a 100-kilometer radius, stood not 20 feet from him. "Though you are a good deal earlier than I had first expected you." "How peculiar." The massive and near mythical being chimed nonchalantly with a deep and almost resonating voice, the likes of which could be mistaken for Kami himself. The giant eyed the boy, who still stood frozen, with a curious gaze. Whether out of fear, shock, plain awe, or even a combination of the three, it didn't matter to the kitsune. As if reading the boy's blank mind and an attempt to reset it, the being spoke again. "What? Nothing to say or scream?" The great fox mused with a slight twitch of an ear, and a sly foxy smirk of mischief. "I'm hurt." The body of pure and immense power lazily spoke as the blonde shifted from shock to confusion. A deep chuckle and near laugh could be heard as the fox sat on its haunches, peering down at the insect-like human boy that stared almost straight up with his mouth agape, trying to say something but the words could not make their way out. "You have no need to fear me, boy. If I truly wish you dead, you would be so already." The bijou's tails flicked in agitation. "If not for me, your futile attempts to end your pathetic life would have had you passed on already." The enormous fox spoke with a visible look of growing annoyance appearing on its fur-clad face, "which you will pay for when the opportunity arises, as soon this is over with." The 9-tailed fox continued in a matter-of-fact tone as its human-like hands tapped the flooded ground in patient beats. At this point, Saying the boy was clueless as to what was going on, and how he should react would be the understatement of the century. Naruto had absolutely no clue where he was, why the Kyuubi who had been thought to be dead was there in front of him in what looked like a prison, and to top it off, he had no idea of how to carry on a conversation with the godly fox. As if it could read his thoughts, the giant kitsune nodded with a smirk. All excellent questions, Kit. Might I say that I must commend you for not replying with anything stupid. The way he said it was as if he had expected him to reply with something cliché like FWH what are you or are you the KQB, which made Naruto grow a quick flash of balls for a moment. A furball, just because I'm barely old enough to enter school doesn't mean I'm stupid. The tempered Uzumaki retaliated with somewhat of a lethal glare. For a 5-year-old that is. The furball, as he called it, shot him his glare, and what little fight he had was again surprisingly reluctant to leave him. Impressive for a brat. One giant ear twitched. You pass for now, the fox stated as he retracted his glare and replaced it with a look of minor, and an I have no other option sort of approving look. Pass what for QB? I can't make him mad, he'll squish me, answered the once more surprisingly intelligent boy who had enough common sense to not piss off the tailed beast whose nostrils were more than 3 times the size of his body. Speaking of nostrils, the Bijou smirked a foxy fong revealing smirk and snorted at the small boy's remark. It's going to be rather interesting with this one, thought the fox in its head. You pass as possibly being worthy to be my potential container, replied the kitsune with a puzzled-looking Naruto gazing up into his eyes with a look that caught his attention. It appeared as if Naruto was also hearing whatever was happening outside of his mind. The Kyuubi had noticed the whispers that had started up a few minutes ago, and were slowly growing in volume and frequency. Both took the time to tune each other out, and see if they could get a clearer input of what was happening around them. Outside Naruto's mindscape, Hokage-sama, began a male blonde shinobi whose appearance seemed to be worrisome for a certain senior citizen who needed no cane to beat some sense into anyone who dared try to cause a hair to go out of place on Naruto's head, though it would take the eyes of a Hyuga to detect a change in the spiky forest that made up the top of his head. The shinobi seemed to be distressed because of the small boy currently slumbering in the bed not 3 feet away from where he was sitting in Hiruzen's private hospital room. If what you're telling me is true, how do you plan on dealing with his aim of becoming a shinobi? With his mental state being in this condition, there's no telling what could happen should he be allowed into the academy. The teal-eyed man reasoned. This really wasn't what Hiruzen wanted to hear. Sure, Naruto was in a fragile state, but with this shinobi's help, perhaps that could be changed. Inoichi, please just do this for me. Not as a shinobi under my command, but as one of the few who have my absolute trust and can call me friend. The old Kage pleaded tiredly. He hadn't slept since he admitted Naruto into the hospital the night before. It was well into the morning now. Inoichi, the head of a clan of ninja who specialize in ninjutsu of the mind and capable of altering, destroying, and in some cases even implanting memories within other shinobi if they so choose to. Some of the more experienced within the clan could also invade the mind of other people, giving them access to their memories and psyche. A skill that have them the ability to make friend turn on friend, a useful and intimidating tool in battle. Inoichi found his current situation particularly difficult, however, as a shinobi of the interrogation unit. His professional opinion would be to deny Naruto any chance at becoming a ninja, simply because of the danger he would pose to his comrades since he was now clearly suicidal. And at such a young age as well. With that being said, the seasoned ninja was torn because of another factor. The Sandaime, his leader, trusted friend, and not to mention the one who bore the name the Professor because of his extensive knowledge and ability to see things through. He had just asked him to basically erase the events of the previous night and allow this suicidal, no, 5-year-old suicidal boy a chance at becoming a ninja. A profession where life depended on other ninja to have your back without question, and the same in return. A mentally damaged ninja would get you killed in no time if given the opportunity, and the Sandaime was asking him to do just that. Thinking hard on it, Inoichi came to the conclusion that not once has the Hokage ever lead him, or the village astray. Even when the opportunity presented itself for him to rule with an iron fist came along during the wars, the Sandaime proved true his loyalty to his village. His decision was made, he had never doubted his leader's intentions or reasoning, and he would not start now. In Naruto's mindscape, it seems we will have to save this for later, Kit. It's time for you to go back and make sure nothing will happen to your body. Lesson number 1. Even in sleep your senses must be alert as if you are not. And with that, the fox slowly faded away into darkness from which Naruto had originally gotten into the landscape of his mind, which he took to calling his mindscape as he exited out. The feeling of floating was upon him once again, though this time it felt as if he were on a cloud, if he could imagine what a cloud felt like. Slowly opening his eyes, Naruto found that the dim light in the room was enough to sting and irritate his eyes, as if the amount of light he needed to see was much less than what was being allowed into his twilight-veiled room. The next thing that he took notice to was the fact that what should have been whispers before, he could now hear as if they were normal spoken words. If that wasn't odd enough, he could also distinguish the slap-like sound that resonated when someone smacks their hand into water. His irritated eyes looked up to see an IV, the source of the annoying crack every time the liquid dripping from the bag dropped into the section where the tubing went up his arm. Well, that's new, thought the little blonde, as usually a drip would be the sound that he would hear coming from something like that, not a amped-up clap. Though what woke him, fully woke him next was the stench that threatened to blow his brains out of his head from the headache it was giving him. Gigi really needs to brush his teeth. Very well, Hokage-sama, I'll get started. Inoichi bowed and turned around to get to work, but was immediately shocked still, sitting up on his bed, and who should be completely out for well over a week after what had taken place not 10 hours ago, was the very boy Inoichi had been asked to give a mental tune-up while he was unconscious. Not knowing what to do, the interrogator ninja immediately turned to his leader for instructions. Hiruzen couldn't believe his eyes. What was once a little boy on the verge of death and damn near the same color as the bed he was laying in, now was propped up and fully awake. Looking around as would a little kid surveying unfamiliar surroundings, just as he should, for he was, in fact, supposed to be just that. A little kid. Then, it hit him just like the smell of his surrogate grandson's blood had the night before. The QB. Taking everything within him not jump up and rush in to embrace the boy in a hold that could quite possibly put him right back to sleep, the old veteran rose an eyebrow and voiced the only words he could form at the moment. Naruto-kun. How are you feeling this afternoon? Hoping not to startle the boy in any way after such an experience, though he was only there to see the aftermath of it, Naruto stood in his propped-up position for a few moments before turning his little head towards his grandfather figure, and the sight that Hiruzen bore witness to broke his heart more ways than he could count. What came into view was a face not belonging to your average, bounding with energy toddler. What looked into the old man's eyes was an expression that could make even a dead man look away, for the sight was not normal to see on one so young. The deadpan face that was once one full of radiant laughter and joy that could cheer up a fellow toddler who had lost his favorite toy, now stood lifeless, as if the candle that lit up his face and eyes had suddenly been blown out. And it was almost instantly followed by an imitation of that former face. Like a clear mask had been put, Naruto's face turned from still and without a spark of life, to a hollow imitation of his once usual smile. The sight was truly tearing the old Kage apart with every fake emotion displayed and sound aloud as the boy began to speak and forced the war veteran to struggle to keep the frown from appearing on his wrinkled brow. Hey Gigi, the obnoxiously loud boy sounded out with a now empty replica of his famous ear-to-ear grin. Upon continuing his sentence, Naruto proceeded to change his expression to that of a confused look, and arched his eyebrows. Where am I? At this point, Hiruzen didn't have the slightest idea of how to answer his surrogate grandson's question, fearful of how his reply may cause the small boy who, if he hadn't have carried him out of his personal hell, appeared to be perfectly healthy with not a scratch on him. You are in the hospital, Naruto-kun. Not 1 second after his words were allowed to escape him did the boy's face undergo a rapid storm of emotions. A face that should only appear on one who has witnessed true terror and agony such as the old survivor himself. Do you remember how you got here, Naruto-kun? The Sandaime dared ask. Inoichi was now once again stuck in between decisions, not knowing if his request to alter the tortured boy's memory was still valid. Though something told him to stay put and see how it panned out. The smaller blonde, who could only look down in shame and defeat slowly, as well as painfully, replied in a regrettable whisper, yes. At this point there was really nothing Naruto could really do or say to get him out of his current situation. The once almost ghost-like elusive boy who could slip through and in between a village whose sole purpose seemed to be to seek him out and give him his daily dose of hate and blame, found himself unable to slip by this time. The only thing Hiruzen could ask was a 3-letter word that would decide the broken boy's fate. A boy who he had grown to love as his own. Why? The single-worded question would set in motion a line of events whose ripples would be felt across the elemental nations and the fabrics of the world itself. The tiny blonde looked directly into the veteran's eyes, with eyes that should not belong to one so young. A look that could make even the healthiest and fullest flower wilt and wither as if a plague had been set upon it. Eyes full of defeat and sorrow, the depths of which one could only achieve through years of unending pain and torment. A short and simple answer was given to the short and simple question. Why not? Naruto replied, sending the lurch-forward body of the leader of his village immediately into the full support of the chair he sat on. The old war veteran looked at him with a loss for words, not knowing what to ask or even say tot that. Not knowing even how to continue what he had set out to do, about to let loose another sentence, he was stopped dead in his tracks by what Naruto had to say next. I know what I have inside me, Gigi. The young blonde began as his expression shifted into a state of blank stillness. It's why the village hates me. Hiruzen looked on at his adopted grandson in both astonishment and horror. Astonishment that he had found out, but horror as his thoughts drifted to just how he had discovered the truth of his burden. Now sitting on the side of the bed and straightening his posture, Naruto spoke again. A cold, icy tone beginning to form as his words spilled into the dull silence of the hospital room. I'm not going to let them make me do it again. The boy's face was etched with determination, and his eyes held scorn with a hint of underlining hate in them, serving to both reinforce his statement and effectively scare the old man with the almost coin-flip change of emotion and body language, an occurrence that almost never occurred to the old-time veteran. Tiny hands bunched up bits of the plain white hospital blanket as Naruto clenched his fists. And an all-too-familiar presence made itself known, though it did not show. It didn't have to, for the old war hero could feel the tailed beast in his grandson's shadow as his small body shook with anger. The limited light in the room seemed to dim as Naruto continued, I'll never let them hurt me again. Had his eyes not been the deep blue that they were, the old man could have sworn he could make out the blurred image of the kitsune that was sealed within his grandson, making its presence known as the shadows behind the eerily still Uzumaki seemed to quiver and fluctuate like smoke as he imagined the commanding presence of the great fox staring him down. And only the stress of metal being compressed and glass shattering broke the unending silence that consumed the room. If this was the power of the fox as he was sealed, one could only imagine what it was like when it was in no such prison. Glancing behind Naruto out of the corner of his eyes, the Sandaime could see the handiwork of the boy's hatred for those who had led him to his self-infliction. The IV the hospital had Naruto on was all but operational. The pressure from his anger had made it compact on itself as if it were in some sort of press. A plausible side effect from being attached to the boy's arm via needle. Hiruzen could do nothing but sit there and continue to stare at Naruto with his still unwavering look of fearful shock. Of all the years he had lived, of all the years he had fought, of all the years he had spent conquering and surviving everything that was thrown in his way, all that time proved for naught, as he had absolutely no idea of what action to take. Looking back at one of his only true friends, he signaled for the man to sit down. Something was telling him that his request would no longer be necessary. The next couple of weeks would hold supervision and constant observation of his behavior. Naruto knew that his Kage grandfather figure would be watching him close. But it wasn't a troubling matter to him anymore. It wasn't like he ever had trouble staying under the noses of ninja before. Waking up from a rather unpleasant dream of reliving the time he had spent in the same apartment he had woken in, only in a much more far-gone state, Naruto found himself sitting up and saying good morning to no one in particular. A habit that he'd had for as long as he could remember. It was a comfort thing, he supposed, the comfort of having someone to greet him in the morning, even if it was himself. It had been about a week since he had been allowed out of the hospital after his attempt on his own life, and he found himself at a loss at what to think. His head was empty, void of any feeling or thought. The only thing that existed in his mind at the moment, the only thought he could hear clearly in his head, was live. The only question was how exactly was he supposed to do that? He had nobody. Nobody to look to for guidance. No father to show him how to will his way through the hell that was his life, and no mother to tell him loving words to keep him motivated. He was all alone. Right from the start, Naruto got up from his small worn-out mattress and headed into the bathroom to wash up. He said nothing as he started running the cold water into the half-stall, half-tub of his shower. His apartment complex was abandoned, and that meant that any maintenance was halted since no one wanted to go near the demon. The water was either freezing cold or steaming hot. The mornings usually cold. The light was working properly now, and he went on to wash the drowsiness of waking up from his body. Well, that's what he would have been doing anyway. The small blonde was wide awake, and clear-headed even at 6 in the morning. The last time he had glanced at the clock in his room, the hour had been 4, and that was before he finally decided to lay down to try and sleep. Had he been daydreaming? There's no blood. And the kunai that I got from the training grounds is missing. Naruto looked around, noticing the distinct lack of any and all traces of the would-be kind Samaritans that had cleaned his blood-stained walls and floors. He nearly missed the absence of the thick, slick sap of coagulated blood going around in trails. The smell of iron and spice was gone as well. Gigi must have had some of his umbu clean up. The small boy spoke out loud to himself. It wasn't like anyone was around to judge him, or do anything to him. It made him feel like somebody was with him, and he didn't care what people thought of him anymore anyway. Not when he was somewhere that was his domain. His place to control. With his morning shower done, Naruto put on some clothes to head out for the day. A simple black t-shirt with a red spiral on the back and dark orange shorts to go along with his navy blue sandals. Hiruzen and Inoichi had explained to him that if he had any chance of still becoming a shinobi for Konoha, he would need to be mentally stable, and evaluated to make sure that he would be fit for duty. The entry age of the academy was 6. That meant that he only had 6 months to prove to the 2 veteran ninja that he was mentally healthy, or at least pretend to be. And so, with nothing better to do, the Uzumaki headed out to have a stroll through the village that hated him. A village that he hated with equal or more intense measure in return. In the Hokage's office, it was a relatively peaceful and non-eventful start of the day for the Sandaime, as he had created a few shadow clones that reluctantly burdened themselves with completing all the paperwork on his desk while he caught up on lost sleep and contemplated on what actions to take regarding a certain Namikaze, an Uzumaki heir. His dreams were plagued with visions of what he had seen in that cursed apartment of his surrogate grandson. Several different versions even ended with Naruto's death. The war hero had many demons haunting his conscience, and even more his dreams. But this was one he was not be able to suppress as easily, because there was no possible way he would be able to forget the decision he had made to keep Naruto in the dark about what he held within him. On top of the fact that he was still hiding the knowledge of his heritage from the boy, the things that they were permitted to do, the things that they were ordered to do, and the things that they did outside their orders, hardened the hearts of all ninja. It allowed them to do whatever was necessary to keep themselves and their families alive and safe. But even a ninja like Hiruzen had his limits. He would burn in hell for what he had allowed to happen to his best friend's son, if he weren't already heading there for the sins that he had committed for his village. What he had pulled Naruto from was, with lack of a better word, a nightmare. A nightmare given reality. Blinking away from his tired thoughts, the old man sat up and looked towards the door, which had been struck by a few knocks. So distracted was he, that the old war veteran hadn't heard or sensed the owner of the knocks coming. Perhaps he was getting too old to be wearing his hat anymore. The elder Hokage groomed himself a bit, and placed the bearing weight of the hat signifying his position upon his head, and nodded to his tired image in the mirror that he pulled out of his desk. Enter. If it had been any other day before the recent events, Hiruzen would have found Inoichi stopping by an enjoyable presence. They had always gotten along rather well. The two were like friends who caught up with each other every time they met, even if it were only a few hours or a day since the last time they had met. This time, however, was a very grave meeting. For the mutually shared experience that the two shinobi had taken part in, they would also both give much for it to have never happened. Stepping into his leader and friend's office, Inoichi wore a smile of reassurance, signaling that the news he brought with him was good. The sight was already cheering the worried man up as he bowed in respect before speaking. Hokage-sama, I have news that I think you'll find very relieving, and you're going to laugh when I tell you who is at the center of it. The blonde jonin spoke with an underlining of humor, as if saying, why am I not surprised, with the little shake of his head that he gave. Seeing the relief in his face along with the obvious glee that went along with it, the Hokage smiled along and nodded his head. So, who does this good news revolve around, Inoichi? A soft but solid smile extended itself proudly upon the blonde nin's face as he continued. Well, it seems as if Naruto-kun has made himself a friend. Inoichi reassured with a nod as the Hokage's brow shot up in a questioning manner. And that number will be raising this afternoon if I know that girl. The Hokage couldn't be happier. And who might his saviors be, Inoichi? Asked the Hokage with a reference to Naruto's hard, but shattered state a week prior in the hospital bed. Inoichi looked down a little at the subtle, but obvious reference to what had transpired with the little boy who was more a wreck than a POW stuck in an enemy's interrogation headquarters. But thinking back to how his daughter had unknowingly pulled the tortured boy out of his pit, even if by just a bit, was enough to leave him without a doubt that he would be okay. Well, it seems Ino has seen something in him. They barely met the other day and aren't separable when they're together. Ino was truly humbled, realizing how much impact having people acknowledge and befriend you can have on somebody. The Hokage could do nothing but smile at hearing the words of his friend, assuring him that his grandson was indeed getting better. And so soon after the horror of his demise at that. It seems she takes after your wife when it comes to healing people's spirits. Any Inoichi? The old man spoke with a knowing and sincere tone. Said blonde shinobi blushed a tiny bit and smiled harder at the statement, bringing him back to the time when he and his wife had been courting before their marriage, or rather his wife courting him, as he was very shy and at the time in a difficult place after the Third War. Chuckles, yes, she's just like her mother. The teal-eyed man blushed in even more embarrassment as he ran his hand through his hair and clenched his little ponytail as he wondered just how much she'd resemble her in time. I haven't known Naruto personally for long, but I'm very happy that they've become friends, and I hope that they'll stay friends. He continued as his joyous smile returned in confirmation that he may have gained a new party member at dinner, as Ino often invited Shikaku and Chose's boys Shikamaru and Choji when they weren't being trained by their respected clansmen. Hiruzen did what Inoichi had never thought he'd do, seeing as how he was the leader of the village and expected to be an object of strength, nearly making him take a stumbling step back. The hero of the three great ninja wars, the god of shinobi, and the professor all rolled into one wise and powerful shinobi, embraced Inoichi in an almost suffocating hug as he could only choke a single word out in gratitude for the blonde father not trying to distance himself or his daughter from his surrogate grandson, quite possibly saving his life in the process. The only word to be sounded, but whose feelings were felt nonetheless, was a solemn and shaky, thank you. The words were all but whispered out, but every ounce of gratitude and honor was conveyed. And though Hiruzen had already expressed his attitude, he still felt the need to shake the jonin's hand before he saw himself out. Sitting back into the comforting embrace of his chair, the old and a little less worried man found himself taking up the picture of the yondaime again, and smiled as the smiling figure in the picture seemed to know what he was going to tell it already. With a waist-level bow to the framed picture, the sandaime retired to his bed, and went on to dream of nothing in particular. Just the sun-filled grounds of the Konoha Grand Stadium. A picture-perfect day, with a cool breeze lazing its way throughout the empty bleachers and benches below his balcony. A strange, but beautiful display of silky feathers dancing about the cool air of the large structure. In the streets of Konoha, the civilian-littered streets in the shopping district were full of chatter, and the occasional grunt of someone in a bad mood. Though some of those snorts and various sounds of disgust were the cause of one Naruto Uzumaki, minding his own business as he walked through the streets. Look at them all, he thought to himself. Each and every one of them would stick a kunai in me if they didn't know that Umbu keep a close watch on me. Naruto looked a few of the villagers he passed in the eye. Each one of them held looks full of hate that were as easy to pick apart from the ones who simply ignored him, as it was easy enough to tell a Hyuga with their bloodline activated, or at rest. It was all in how they looked at him, and they wore their distrust of him like a badge of honor as they turned their heads to follow his receding form. You are most certainly right about that, Kit. You should know that each and every person around you has the capability to act on their hatred. You are a monster in child's form to their eyes, and all it would take for them to attempt to slay the beast that they see is the right push. The Kyuubi spoke in Naruto's mind on such suddenness that he almost fell out of step. He noticed that a few of the villagers shot him a look when he stumbled slightly. Like a pack of rabid animals, they locked onto him and just waited for him to do something that would warrant them a chance to cause him harm. Parasites. He growled inwardly, not really knowing where he had actually gotten that word from. Getting out of the heat of attention, Naruto turned a corner sharply and sped down the alleyway after he noticed the more daring of the villagers follow him. He had always been a nimble body, and for reasons he now knew the cause to, he could move however fast his body would allow for much longer than anyone his age. He simply didn't tire from running and jumping around, so hightailing it out of the alley, the small blonde sprinted and leapt from dumpster to wall, and finally over the section of fence that surrounded the part of the shopping district that he was at. He had a good ways to go to the park that nobody usually occupied. A perfect place for him to get away from it all. Speaking of which, what do you mean everyone can act on their hatred? If the bijou was talking about their usual rounds of throwing hard objects, and their attempts to beat him, he already knew that. A slight warm haze filled his head as the feared voice of the kitsune within him boomed in his mind again. I mean just that. Act. To truly display their emotion, in this case, the hatred towards you for simply housing me within your body. Not the petty public humiliation that they subject you to day in and day out, but to actually seek to claim your life. It is human nature to attempt to destroy what is out of their control, and if they cannot, then they destroy themselves instead. Naruto lowered head a bit, to where his hair shadowed his eyes. He had always assumed the mob beating that he had to face at times was the extent of the village's cruelty. To learn that there was even more that they would be able to do was just more weight on his already scarred young mind. So you're saying they would kill me if they got the chance? It wasn't a question, but a statement. A menacing growl was the agreement that he got in return. Though Naruto had an idea that the display of anger wasn't directed towards him. If they so much as breathe in your direction the wrong way again, the spineless worms will find themselves missing the hand that they tried to harm you with. Hearing footsteps approaching from some was behind him, Naruto felt the urge to conceal himself, to decide if whoever the person tracing his tracks was no threat, or an enemy. A young troublemaker-looking genin boy walked by shortly after the young Uzumaki dove into some nearby bushes. His orange shorts would probably get him noticed, but laying down, his black shirt would keep him concealed. Now if only my hair wasn't so bright, he mumbled under his breath. Naruto watched as the unsuspecting genin walked right by him, while muttering tasteless insults about the demon brat, and how he thought he had spotted him. After all, you are not as helpless as you once were. The bijou added after Naruto's comment on his hair, because now you have me. Furrowing his brow, Naruto crept out from the bushes and took off at a jog for the empty park after he felt it was safe enough to venture out in the open. You did that? Usually he just ran like hell whenever someone started trouble. Half the time, the people going after him were ninja, and the only training he had was self-taught toilet training. Hiding wasn't exactly in his list of things to do when being pursued by a mob of angry villagers. He figured if he did hide, the shinobi in the crowd would just get an easy picking at him, genin or no genin. I can influence you, use my power and presence to point you in the direction I wish, but I cannot control you. The seal that imprisons me keeps me from doing so. Sighing, Naruto sped by a group of villagers in his way, slowing down and moving through the abundant foliage in the village to keep from being spotted. He had never thought about traveling like this before. It would seem that the bijou knew what he was talking about. So you would control me if it weren't for the seal. The small blonde was feeling more alone with each passing moment. The demon fox snorted in amusement and mild annoyance. Would you believe me if I told you that I am not as cruel as you mortals portray me to be? The Uzumaki smiled a little after successfully sneaking past the group of villagers. Now it was a straight shot to the park where he could have a rare slice of peace. More than I would believe someone who told me that the villagers were good people. All but seeing the boulder-sized eyes roll after another snort, Naruto made short work of the distance that was left until reaching the park. Then that is at least a start. Which is much more than I can say for any other of your kind, Kit. The Uzumaki smiled a little as he picked up the pace, and dashed in and between the various trees and bushes that lined the park. Well, all but one. It was a rather beautiful sunny midday in Konoha. The sun was drenched the leaves of the trees and filled the thick blades of grass in the park to the brim with light. There was a slight breeze gliding throughout the area, and the whole place seemed to be alive with the way everything danced along with the wind. The only thing that was still was the trio of little kids waiting impatiently for a certain blonde who was running late. A small girl whose platinum blonde hair was multiple shades paler than a certain sun-kissed haired whiskered boy was waiting anxiously for her newest friend. One Yamanaka Ino was fearful that Naruto may have been kidding when he had promised to meet her at the park with her two pretty much birth friends. One was tall for a 6-year-old boy, and was currently occupying himself with absolutely nothing as he laid down against a nearby tree with his hands behind his head, smashing his pineapple-style haircut to the side lazily. Her other, hungrier companion to say the least, was on his third bag of potato chips and munching his way through it as if it were second nature to him. With all the constant chewing, it was a wonder to the other two kids how the red spirals on the thicker boy's cheeks didn't deteriorate under the constant motion. His light brown hair was spiked as well, but that wasn't as important as his ability to eat his own body weight in chips. Minutes went by and not so much as a sliver of a sight of the wayward blonde nervous wreck was to be seen, and the little purple-clad platinum-haired girl awaiting him was just as nervous as her new friend was when they had first met. "Come on, Naruto, where are you? I'm gonna beat you up when you get here." The little sky-blue-eyed girl began to tap her foot on the ground with a pout as she began to get the feeling that the source of her anxiety was near. Flashback. Settling home after her fun-filled day of playing with her friends with the addition of a golden blonde boy that she had just met, Ino was happy. Plain and simple. She now had 3 very good friends and was making herself nearly bounce out of her shoes when she started thinking that in only 6 months, she and her trio of best friends would hopefully be entering the Ninja Academy together. The possibility of them all ending up on a team together, or at least with one out of the group if they were to be split apart, was very comforting. Ino knew they had at least some kind of edge on everybody else because, as she would put it, they were totally pro at playing ninja and were very good at hiding. Well, all except for Choji. But he would find something he's really good at besides eating soon enough. Ino was sure of it. Leaving her room and making her way down the stairs leading to the living room, Ino was starved from the day of play and was ready for dinner. Upon entering the dining room, she noticed a few things that were off, and they were out of place enough for her to actually pause after walking in. She looked to see the table had already been set, which puzzled her. It was usually her job to set the table. The next thing she noticed were her parents already sitting at the table, waiting for her. Ino knew she wasn't in trouble because they greeted her with a smile, so figuring that the whole deal was just because, she smiled back and sat down to go on having a nice dinner with her parents. A nice, normal, family dinner. After eating their food in peace, and taking a few minutes to talk about how each other's day was and whatnot, Inoichi turned to his daughter. "So Ino, I heard you've made a new friend. Uzumaki Naruto, if I'm not mistaken," he said with a calm, but strong voice. The young Yamanaka was wondering when this would be brought up. Ino wasn't stupid, even if she was barely going to be academy age. Having a ninja as a parent made her brighter than the average civilian. She didn't think her parents would bring it up the same day that she met Naruto. However, Ino was prepared. She had known from the moment he had run into her who he was, seeing as how you were considered special for not knowing who the demon brat was. Why she gave him a chance to play with her and her friends was simply because she did not judge anyone without knowing them first, as she would hope that people would do the same for her. What she saw was a peaceful, caring, and gentleman of a little boy. He was no different than anyone else, and if anyone said differently in front of her, she'd give them a good kick in the shin. There was a reason why a certain clumsy Nara clan head was always weary of her when she was in new clothes, in his presence, while he had a cup of any form of liquid in hand. Ino took a deep breath and stared down her father as best she could. "Yes, father, and he's not who people say he is. He's my friend, and anyone who says different will have to answer to me," the little blonde fury exclaimed as she flexed her little arm, showing what pain awaited those who would challenge her view of her newest best friend. Ino expected a fight from her parents, a glare at the very least, but all she got was laughter. Inoichi couldn't be prouder of his daughter, for being as sociable as she was, he was afraid that Ino would follow the crowd and hate Naruto just because everyone else did. Seeing as how this wasn't the case, he smiled widely, as did his wife, and both nodded in approval. "I'm glad to hear it, Ino." He chuckled with noticeable glee on his face. Looking towards her husband in a humorous manner, Ino's mother, Keiho, continued for him, as he was probably occupied with conjuring up countless different reasons as to why his daughter is his princess, and will always be his princess right about now, and we'll be expecting one more addition at our table next time we have your friends for dinner. A hazel-eyed, shoulder-length brunette beauty with fair skin spoke in her husband's wake with equal glee. Ino could do nothing but smile and hug her parents. They had accepted her newest friend whom she would enjoy spending time with, and that just meant easier playtime all around. Flashback end. The talking to that she had gotten from her parents, particularly her father, really made an impression on her. Later on that night, Inoichi had come to her room to discuss Naruto's upbringing. Though they were the same age, Ino couldn't believe that he had been living basically by himself since he could walk. Her father had told her that the orphanage had barely taken care of him, and he had been given his own apartment at the age of 3 with Umbu to help teach him things. As young as she was, Ino knew they came from 2 different worlds. Naruto was the same age as her, but she felt like he was a genin already. She couldn't explain it, he was just different from everyone their age. But that still isn't an excuse for being late. The tempered girl pouted as she closed her eyes with a humph. Moments passed in silence before a lazy child's voice rasped out over the crunchy sounds of the huskier boy eating chips. "What's got her all grumpy?" The black, spiky-haired kid in green shorts and an olive shirt didn't so much as open an eye as he voiced his thoughts. The thick boy sitting not too far away from him shrugged. "Munch munch, I dunno." A tired sigh came out of the lazy boy laying against the tree. Sigh troublesome. The bristling of branches and the thumping of footsteps got the trio's attention as a vibrant blonde-haired boy leaped over the fairly tall bush and landed in a crouch. Landing on his feet with one hand on the ground to balance his landing, Naruto found his azure blue eyes staring into the sky-blue orbs of the girl he had met the day before, who also had an awful temper building up as her foot was now tapping at an intimidating pace. "You know, I just remembered that I made a friend yesterday, and that I was supposed to meet her here." A sweat drop began to form on the side of his head. Half an hour ago. Dark chuckling erupted in his mind. Kakik, you'll remember next time. Naruto started to get nervous. And why is that? You will see. Naruto smiled nervously and scratched the back of his head. Hee, how's it going? Ino-chan? The anxious boy began to sweat as he could almost feel her anger sparking in tune with her eerily twitching eyebrow. Here, Ino? Looking at her, he knew he was in for it. Ino's eyebrow and foot stopped twitching / tapping simultaneously, and she scanned him over. He wasn't hurt, so he couldn't have been late due to an injury. He didn't seem to be sick because he wasn't sneezing or anything else along the lines of being sick. What she did notice were the bags under his eyes and how groggy he looked. It was decided. He overslept. Bracing for impact, Naruto took one for the team. Crap, didn't think ahead to see if we had enough time for all the chit-chatting earlier. That chit-chatting, as you called it, happened to be important, brat. The Bijou chimed in nonchalantly. But out of this QB, he really didn't need this right now. Kakik. Naruto was broken out of his miniature banter by a fist to his head. Naruto baka. The little blonde terror shouted as she hit him on top of his head, waking up the sleeping boy against the tree and stopping the chubby boy mid-chew with her yelling, I thought you were supposed to meet me here an hour ago. Naruto flinched and looked down in an unforeseen shame and defeated nature. If Ino didn't know any better, she'd swear she had heard a remorseful and almost shuddering sigh escape her fellow blonde's mouth. Worried she might have gone just a little bit too far, Ino placed her hand upon his shoulder and proceeded to lighten things up. I'm sorry, Naruto, maybe you were really busy and came here as fast as you could. I mean, you did jump over the wall of bushes over there at top speed to get here. Looking over to the bushes she was referring to, she then realized that the feat Naruto had pulled off was impressive. Really impressive. The bushes had to at least be almost 2 meters tall, sparking curiosity as to how the boy managed to vault over, top speed or not. Turning to her fellow blonde to question how he managed to vault over, she was stopped in her tracks as the boy was still looking down as ever, though with an empty look in his eyes. Naruto-kun, are you okay? Ino asked sincerely as she was beginning to worry that she had really overdone it. Naruto let out a sigh as he rubbed his hands together. I'm sorry for making you and your friends wait, Ino. He put his hands in his pockets, never looking up from the ground. I'm already causing you trouble and we've barely even met. You must hate me. Ino was taken back at his remark. Sure, she had blown up a little bit, but that didn't mean she hated him for being late. She was just teasing him, even if she was a little upset. Seeing as how she was only 5 years old, just like Naruto, she didn't quite have the capacity to think further into his behavior. So, she decided to just salvage the situation and continue on with their play day like they planned to. It's okay, Naruto-kun, really. Nothing to fuss about. The little girl said with a smile. Without anything to fight with, Naruto could do nothing but nod his head in agreement, and put on a small smile as her other two companions seemed to be into the commotion he had unintentionally been making. Alright, Naruto-kun, these are my other friends. The now ecstatic Ino was hopping up and down as she called over her two best friends. She gestured her hand at the tall 5-year-old with a pineapple haircut. This is Naro Shikamaru. The girl giggled as the boy stifled a yawn. Yo, was all that was said before a whisper, that only Naruto could hear ever since waking up in the hospital, made him chuckle under his breath as the boy named Shikamaru was muttering troublesome, under his breath. Ino moved on to the now frowning, thick boy who had just finished his third, large bag of potato chips. And this is a kimchi choji. Ino rolled her eyes as the boy was still fretting over his shortage of snacks as his stomach made the problem audible. Naruto nodded in acknowledgement, surprising both boys as he greeted them since he was proving pretty much every rumor wrong so far. Nara-san, Akimichi-san, very nice to meet friends of Ino-chan. He spoke with as much respect as he could muster, not wanting to miss or mess up another opportunity of possibly making more friends. It wasn't in Naruto's nature to play the respectable role. With him, what you see is what you get. He was true and honest with the people he interacted with, and expected nothing less in return. That, and if what Ino had told him the day before, her dad would be watching him close. He needed to try to be normal for himself, as much as he needed to get his approval for the academy. A win-win situation. The boys looked at each other and then Nara just shrugged with a smile. Just our first names are fine, Naruto. Friends of Ino's are friends of ours. Shikamaru said with a smile, while pointing back at Ino in a hitchhiker fashion as the thicker boy nodded with his mouth, since it was too full to speak as he somehow managed to procure another bag of chips out of nowhere. Naruto could only smile. For the next couple of hours, the group of kids set off to play ninja, Choji being IT multiple times as he was always easily caught. For a while, Naruto wasn't sure if he just felt out of place, or if he truly didn't belong with anyone his age. But soon enough, the Uzumaki was smiling and playing with as much vigor as Ino, and managed to only get discovered once. Far off into the distance, however, a certain ponytailed shinobi observed the group of playing children with a critical eye. Mumbled the interrogator ninja as he was off resting in a tree while watching his only daughter play with her usual friends, and the addition of the broken boy he had seen but a few days prior. If he hadn't had looked into the young boy's psyche for a split second before the walls of his mind came crashing down in a baffling defense, Inoichi would have never had been able to tell him apart from any other kid running around and playing ninja with their friends before entering the academy. The proud father couldn't help but smile as his daughter had done the simplest, yet most life-saving and life-changing decision that she would have in her life. Taking one last glance to the energetic bunch, minus one particular Nara, he once again smiled as he saw the real version of the fabled Naruto smile with every bit of vibrant joy present in it while he stalked off back to the interrogation headquarters, as his lunch break was over. On his way home, young Naruto had stopped by Ichiraku's to tell Tsuchi and his daughter Ayame all about his new friends, and how they had spent the whole day playing. The humble owners of the shop were so excited and happy for their might-as-well-be surrogate son/brother, that they had offered him unlimited ramen for a week, not caring if they had to restock their inventory 3 or 4 times, seeing as how the boy could finish a whole cauldron by himself. Where that food all went into his tiny body is a question that they asked themselves many times over and just left it to be one of the wonders of the elemental nations. It was about 11 at night now. The streets of Konoha were quiet as activity died down, and everyone had already settled in for the night, having completing their necessary everyday tasks hours before and were now either sleeping off the day's activities, or doing something else. Walking through the empty and darkened streets, Naruto couldn't help but feel as if something was wrong. He was in the outskirts of the shopping district now, maybe 10 minutes walking distance from the red light district, and another 20 to his apartment, since he lived in the heart of it. Usually even at this time of night there were still people buzzing around, either heading home or heading to one of the many brothels in the red light district. But as he stood in the crossroads between districts, the streets were empty. He couldn't even find any stray animals rummaging through the garbage littering the poorly kept alleys and overflowing dumpsters. The only thing he could hear, and practically feel, was silence. It was then that Naruto felt an ominous presence on him, and seeing as how there was nobody around that was visible, the boy came to the conclusion that he was very familiar with. In fact, it was something that he had developed a sort of sixth sense for. He was being watched. The crescent moon shone like a warped star as Naruto gazed up into the dark, clouded sky. Here we go again. Growing up under the eyes of a shinobi village's guard, being watched and having to sneak your way around just to get to a quiet place to rest or even go out to get his essentials to live, Naruto had developed a sense of stealth that shouldn't be present until he was already a trained ninja, though the village had saw to it that he were primed and ready to enter the academy well before he ever reached it. Sensing his body was in danger, and clearly hearing a thrown object sailing through the air heading straight for him, Naruto instinctively dove forward and circled behind a dumpster in a nearby alleyway. Only a moment passed by and he already knew what was happening, for it had not been the first, and it would not be the last time he's had to deal with his current situation. Albeit this time, he truly was fearful for his life. Looking through the crack in between the dumpster and the alley's wall, he could vividly make out the gleam of a shuriken, embedded halfway into a wooden post that was next to him just a second ago. His little heart racing, and knowing that hiding wouldn't probably do him any good, Naruto ran for his life after catching a glimpse of a figure in the dark. It was relatively small in size, but the figure with a masculine build was wearing a headband on his forehead that bore the symbol of Konoha on it, signifying that he was, indeed, a ninja. That's new. Judging from his size, Naruto would say he's a genin. But however green he may be, it still made him deadly to Naruto, and he knew it. The small blonde's pace just increased even faster, far exceeding one of his age at the rate he was going. He had never been pursued by a ninja before, they had only ever gotten a few hits on him before having to leave before the arrival of Anbu. But now, he had to face his sudden enrollment into Crash Course Flee from Ninja 101, head-on. Not stopping, the blur that was Naruto raced straight through the middle of the village, not bothering to call for help, for he already knew that would only see to it that others joined the one that was already chasing him and intent on taking his life. Hour-long seconds passed by as his pursuer didn't let up, and the full-on sprint that Naruto had taken off in, pushing past any speed he had reached before, had him panting heavily as he was desperately trying to get away to save himself. If he could fight, he would, but Naruto knew that if he stopped now he would be dead. Dipping his head away from the sounds of shuriken whizzing by, and taking with them the tips of a few of his blonde hairs, Naruto took a chance and did a hard right turn, into another alleyway leading out to the training fields. Lose him in the forest. Not looking back, the boy maneuvered through and around the long alleyway debris as if he were a seasoned acrobat content on winning some sort of prize, the prize in this case being his life. Dodging, juking and jumping from and on top of dumpsters and various discarded debris littering the long alley in between a random warehouse and a large apartment complex, Naruto began to notice something. His movements started to become more fluid and precise, as if he were getting better at running for his life. His pursuer was also surprised by his sudden increase in acrobatic ability. He thought he would have ended the demon's life minutes ago. Seeing him now was sending a chill running through his spine since right now it was only 5. Imagining what it would be capable of later was all the more drive for him to kill it now. Chancing a glance back for only a fraction of a second, Naruto could clearly see the shape and glint of a kunai being palmed and gripped harshly no more than 10 yards behind him, intended on finding its way into his little body. Facing forward again, he dug deep and raced even faster while still avoiding shuriken. Suddenly, time seemed to stand still as his heartbeat slowed from almost a bursting rate to miles in between each thump. The once moonlit alleyway was then clouded over in a shroud of darkness growing from the edges of his vision. Just as half his eyesight was blackened, leaving the center in a blurred tunnel vision, A warm and fire-like feeling flowed through his little body and his sight exploded into clarity. For a moment, he was nearly blinded because of his now extremely sensitive eyes. Power surged through him. He felt light as a feather, and yet stronger than he ever thought he could be as he leapt from wall to wall and taking off on all fours as soon as he hit the ground without so much as a fraction of hesitation. The raw power and killing intent that came of Naruto in tidal waves froze the rogue in place, and even caused him to cut himself as the gray-clad shinobi crashed in a sudden stop. Naruto didn't look back after that, and found himself sprinting on all fours like second nature. His eyes were still adjusting to the sudden ability to see completely clear in the dark, but he didn't miss the way the village blurred past his vision as he didn't let up his pace for a moment. Naruto saw a large building in front of him, and knew that the only choice was to go over it. Going around would give his pursuer a chance to catch up, and that simply wouldn't do. He couldn't form coherent thoughts at the moment. He was running off pure unimpaired instinct. Getting closer to the building, Naruto felt like he was dreaming when he saw his hands palm the floor like an animal, and could feel his legs coil. The next thing the small blonde knew, he was sailing through the air. He regained some higher brain functionality then, and waved his arms around frantically. If he could, he would have screamed, but he was still in his trance-like state, so the only sounds he could hear was the panting of his breath and the thundering of his heart. Landing on the roof and rolling to disperse the impact force, Naruto continued to just look through his own eyes as his body seemingly moved on its own, and leaped over a table and a small wooden fence that was on the roof, before jumping off of the 4-story tall building, only to land on the ground with a crunch before using his arms to push himself back up, and kept on going. Seconds? Minutes? Hours? Naruto couldn't tell how long he had been running. His vision was completely blurred over now, leaving him almost blind. He had lost all sense of time as soon as the massive surge of power exploded in him. Naruto had expected his vision to clear, but it didn't register in his mind that it was actually deteriorating as he kept on moving. His body felt like it was full of lead now, and his vision was veiled in gray, as if all the color was taken from the world. Finally, at what seemed like the worst time possible, racing alongside a line of bushes that ran through several training grounds on all fours, Naruto felt as if he were pulled by whatever force was pushing him forward. He was thrown down deep into what he thought was a hole in the ground, and fell for what seemed like eternity, as he watched the light of the moon and stars fade away from view. The curtain of bright starlight morphed into only a single ray of veiled light as he finally crashed into the ground with a loud thud, toppling and flopping on every part of his body possible, sharp pains invading him every time he hit the floor and fell again. Stairs? Naruto thought as he finally hit solid ground and slid for a couple more feet, feeling like it took minutes for him to come to a complete stop. After he inevitably slowed to a standstill, Naruto coughed out the breath he had been holding in, and gulped down air as the warm feeling flowing through his veins subsided. Slow building panic and exhaustion started to take hold, because now he was truly starting to realize the gravity of the situation he was just in. Crap, crap, crap. Naruto tried to move, but couldn't even growl in anger when his body refused to twitch a finger. Damn, now what do I do? That genin is going to gut me. As much as he was fighting it, the exhaustion was catching up to Naruto, and the small boy was putting all of his will to keep his eyes open. Hush, kid. You're safe now. The bijou inside him finally spoke up in a relieved manner, though Naruto didn't really notice. He was too focused on trying to keep his eyes open, but to no avail. His body was battered, weary, and completely drained of energy. Another warmth spread through his body, only this time it was faint, like a low flame steadily burning with dim red coals underneath. Rest now, Naruto. I'll watch over you, and take care of any fools who attempt to tamper with you. The demon fox waited patiently for Naruto to stop fighting. Sleep, you earned it. Naruto didn't have to be told twice this time, though he still reluctantly slipped into unconsciousness, and allowed his body to rest. The Kyuubi observed his sleeping form as his body had already shimmered into the mindscape. For a while, the bijou simply sat on its haunches as Naruto let out quiet snores. The ancient fox played the events of the night over in its head, analyzing how the small boy had reacted to the life-or-death situation that he had been in. Seeing that while he fled, it had taken a considerable amount of courage to act the way he did. To survive, the giant fox closed its eyes after a moment, and slowly settled its head on its paws. 3 of its tails wrapping around Naruto and brought him in close to its body. Naruto never knew it, but he often appeared in the mindscape while he slept, seeing as how the bijou really had no reason to hate the boy. Having had no choice in becoming a Jinchuriki, the kitsune slowly warmed up to him after watching him having to endure everything in his life, all for a village that wanted to kill him as gratitude. The bijou hadn't told him yet, but she could see through his eyes, hear what he hears, and feel what he feels along with hearing his thoughts. She had been there every step of the way so far, and it hurt her to see this innocent boy being subjected to such treatment. As much as it had annoyed her when he had tried to kill himself, the Kyuubi understood why Naruto had done it, and though she didn't show it, it rattled her heart seeing him that way. Feeling what he kept buried inside as he attempted to take his life in order to escape a world that condemned him, or saving them. Even if he wasn't a bijou, or even a fox. No offspring that young should ever raise a hand against itself. The Bija had already made up her mind to bind herself to this boy, and watching him go through yet another gamble for his life so soon after their meeting only cemented her will further to help Naruto change his fate. For it would be a fate that determined the journey of so many others. After all, she was a sucker for a child in need. 2 days later, it had been a week of troubled sleeping for the Hokage as he had yet another bout of endless nightmares of past mistakes and regrets. He sought to make as little disturbance for himself as possible as his sleep deprivation-induced headache was making every word of his paperwork annoyingly hard to retain, and he often had to reread sentences so as to not accidentally sign a request from one of the civilian council members to have Naruto imprisoned, for safety reasons, or have him exiled from Konoha altogether. The most the old man could do was sigh. He was growing increasingly tired of their pointless and antagonizing attempts to make the innocent boy's life harder than it already was. After about a solid 2 hours of constant signing or vetoing forms and requests, a deep and forceful knock sounded from his office door, making him glance up regrettably, for chances were that this couldn't be anything good for a change. "Enter," spoke the tired and already burned-out old man. A trio of long black-haired men strode in with a visible look of elegance and expected reverence in each step they took. The look on their faces spoke the silent words "I'm better than you" with every non-existent expression that they made. The Sandaime looked to the clock on the wall beside him and raised a brow at the sight of the 3 nobles. 9 in the morning? Much too early for a Hyuga to be inconveniencing themselves for a demand. "Hokage-sama." 2 of the now deemed Hyuga men spoke and bowed silently. The third man in the middle gave an acknowledgeable short bow and spoke. "Hokage-sama, there is a matter of which I, as the head of the Hyuga clan, have to discuss with you personally." A bit of venom was issued at the mentioning of himself being the clan head, which only the old Kage could detect, while the 2 men beside the clan head bowed to both the Hokage and their clan leader before exiting. Not one moment after the door closed did the Hyuga lord let out a tired sigh as he sat himself in the chair in front of the Sandaime's desk, his aura losing all radiance of nobility and becoming that of just a simple man. "I take it the elders have been pestering you about the emissary sent from Kumogakure?" asked the seeming all-knowing old man with a small friendly smile. The gray-eyed Hyuga gave another sigh and nodded in confirmation. "Yes." The man looked towards his longtime friend and mentor. "As you know, this will directly affect my daughters." He eased out with a restrained and worried look. The Sandaime looked down a little and nodded. "What will you do, Hayashi?" "They are requesting a truce." Though the old war veteran knew better than to think that's all Kumo was looking to get their hands on. The man now named Hayashi gave another worried look, as this would make things much more difficult. "You and I both know that they will be sending a capable emissary to not only try for a treaty, but to see if there is a Byakugan that is unsealed and available to obtain." Hayashi's hands balled into fists at the thought of Kumo trying to steal a member of his family, let alone one of his daughters. They had always been greedy for bloodline limits, but not as ravenous in their attempts to gain more than they had been with his clan. Seeing as how all of the branch family is sealed, that leaves only the main branch vulnerable to abduction. Elders, genin and younger, the next generation is most at risk while they are still being raised as ninja. The Sandaime rubbed his temples as he thought the situation over and saw only disaster. He knew what Kumo was up to. You don't go from mortal and near lifelong enemies to suddenly wanting peace in the blink of an eye without suspicion. Needless to say, the Hokage knew for certain that the Reikage had no intention of peace, but rather an easy opportunity to get his hands on Kekkei Genkai, as he was still overly obsessed in making his village powerful after its defeat by the Yondaime himself during the Third Great Ninja War. Both men took on a grieving look, both thinking the same thing. The village of Warmongers would be after one of his daughters, given the fact that they both were unsealed and carried the same blood of the clad head, making their abilities probably more than exceptional when compared to the rest of their generation. I will have no choice in Hinata's protection, seeing as how her training has already begun. She is expected to rely more on herself than her bodyguards. The tradition of the Hyuga deemed the young ones to be strong from an early age, and there are no exceptions. Hayashi caressed his forehead. He had gone through the same thing at her age, and was even separated from his twin to make him more self-sufficient. Hanabi, however, will not leave my side. She is not under any such restriction. Hayashi did not like this at all, rather he loathed and resented it. Being the head of a clan was more of a shackle than a freedom when it came to family and clan affairs. Having to make his decisions for the majority, ignoring the individual's side as a cost. Being a true father to his daughters was extremely difficult, mostly because he was politically forced to raise them not only as his daughters, but as future clan heirs. Though he was hard on them, he wished he could spend his time with them doing what normal fathers would do. He longed to read their children books, teaching them simple necessities instead of having a servant do it for him. How he longed to just embrace his daughters wholeheartedly without care and full of love. They reminded him so much of his wife, Hinata and Hanabi, more so with Hinata. She was a near reincarnation of her mother. This made his pain of restraining his love for his daughters all the more torturous. He just wished that they could go about their lives as normal people, normal shinobi. But alas, this was not the case. They were Hyuga, famed for their Dijutsu, the Byakugan. Their all-seeing eyes whose vision could see as far as 10 kilometers when a skilled user focused on long range, and see through solid objects with X-ray-like sight. All Byakugan users could see both chakra, and the chakra network in a person's body, but skilled users could also see the tenketsu within the body. The small pressure points in the chakra network that act like checkpoints that allow chakra to flow through the body. Nothing noticeable could be done, though the Hokage would not let any in his village fall prey to their enemies and would see to it that a squad of ANB would tail Hinata in case of a probable abduction attempt. ANB will see to it that your daughters are safe. Hayashi, family is a precious thing, and a father will do anything in their means to protect it. The old man lowered his head a bit as his eyes closed. Behind them, images of a certain blonde smiling at him flashed in his head and was quickly followed by that fateful night, and the bloodied boy he had taken to the hospital. Hayashi saw this, and knew what the old man was thinking about. Being one of the few people Hiruzen could truly call friend, the old man had confided in Hayashi whether or not it was wise to let Naruto into the ninja corps. As a clan head, and as a father still raising his children, Hiruzen had hoped the Hyuga would have a more individual outlook on Naruto in contrast to his own opinion. Hayashi saw what others would think as a weapon in Naruto's hands, to be a shield for the boy. Being a ninja would not make Naruto any more dangerous than he already was, but instead, give him the tools he needs to pick himself up and protect. He knew the boy would not harm anyone outside of being an enemy or for self-defense purposes. Hayashi's eyes allowed him to see many things in the village, and he saw something much more than just a living prison for the demon that had once plagued his village. When are they expected to arrive? Asked Hayashi, breaking his thoughts away from one of the many regrets that he held on his conscience. Hiruzen sighed as he took out his pipe, and gave it a puff. Hard to say. I received the letter of their departing just this morning. I would prepare any plans that you have for your daughter's sake soon. They won't be more than a few days at best. The Hyuga nodded, soothing his headache with a rub of his brow. A small smile formed on both men, and the smile only grew as Hayashi slowly brought out a bottle of fine sake that he had kept in his robes. Until then, would you like to drink your worries away? Hiruzen chuckled and fished out 2 shot glasses from his desk. I'd love to. Hayashi cracked open the jar with a nod. His headache wasn't going anywhere, so might as well numb it down while he was there. Ugh. Damn, that hurt. That was all Naruto could muster in his mind without having a shocking pain bolt through his little body. Thinking back on the previous night's events, he found that he could recall it all perfectly with the exception of the point in time before he reached the training fields. Only fractions of what he had experienced was left intact in his memory after that surge of unknown power surged through him like a stream of hot, but freezing fire. Lay still, Kit, your body is still recuperating, spoke Naruto's demonic tenant. The small blonde scrunched his face in confusion, and regretted it instantly when his whole face felt like it was being run through an electrified grinder. Recuperating from what? I feel like I was put through a blender, and had needles go into the mix too. Even breathing sent Naruto into a twitches of sharp pains that seemed to swim all around and within his body. The Bijou muled over how exactly she was supposed to explain the current situation to the 5-year-old. Listen to me carefully, and do not interrupt. During your escape yesterday, you were using everything you had, and were running on empty while that coward was hailing shuriken at you. You were essentially slowing down into death, seeing as how you were matched with an assassin bent on taking your life. Naruto mentally nodded in content since doing it physically would just cause him pain. Taking his silence as her cue to continue, the Great Fox did so. On the last stretch, I flooded your chakra network with as much of my power as I could force through the gaps in your seal. Naruto took on a mentally puzzled look in his head, not quite understanding what the fox was getting at. But the boy found that letting the Bijou finish usually led to answers, so he decided to just stay silent as she explained what she was telling him. The Bijou figured that she'd have to explain in great detail everything that was currently happening to Naruto's body and what changes are occurring, seeing as how he probably only knew the very basics at best about chakra and how the human chakra network worked. Sighing, she dedicated herself to a comfortable position in her prison and went on to break it to her container just what was happening to him, because there was definitely no turning back for him now. Kit, the Great Fox began. Dive into your mind so you can focus on what I'm saying and give yourself a break from your body's changes for a while. Naruto found no problem with that at all, seeing as how the pain wasn't going anywhere. Now that he thought about it, the pain was actually growing gradually. Whatever was happening to him was already spreading all over his body, but at the same time seemed to overlap and layer itself. If that made any sense. This had the boy completely dumbstruck and almost in a panic, but he forced himself to save that for later and listen to what his tenant had to say. Inside Naruto's mindscape, the familiar piece of silence, followed by the sound of single droplets of water hitting a still lake, rang in Naruto's ears, signaling that he was inside his mindscape. Naruto looked at himself and found nothing was wrong with his body aside from a few tears in his clothing. It seemed that whatever mental image of himself that he had before diving in is what shows in his mind. He looked off a ways and saw the Kyuubi laying lazily on its side. He took a few steps forward and slipped through the giant metal bars of its prison, seeing as how it was no longer necessary to remain on the other side of the gates anymore. Taking a cross-legged seat beside the arm the Kyuubi was resting her head on, Naruto leaned back on her, searching for comfort. Having never had anyone to cool with after surviving an ordeal like the one of the night before, Naruto was hoping now that they were on somewhat friendly terms that he could share his relief with his tenant. He had survived yet another try on his life. The boy began purging himself of any fear, and the waning pressure of having nearly been killed was sinking into his psyche just as his body was sinking into the reddish-orange fur of the nine-tailed fox. Seeing as how nothing was done to resist his attempt at comfort, Naruto found himself relieved and sank further into her fur with his body curled, shielding himself from an imaginative force. As if the assassin were right there staring at him, the ancient fox noticed her container's attempt at soothing himself with her aid and made no move to push him away. She had already decided to present him the contract to bind them to each other, to be at each other's sides through thick or thin. Her contract basically made them a form of life partners, a sort of family tie, and she would not offer such a bond if she wasn't able to deal with this side of her container, the exposed side. She wouldn't do much, but would allow him to use her as support. That alone would have sufficed had it been any other time, but within the vicinity of 2 weeks, the 5-year-old had attempted to take his life, found himself making his first friends and attempted to fit with them, and just recently survived an attempt at his life from an unknown enemy. Needless to say, the boy was a typhoon of emotion and thoughts. Kurama thought to herself, and decided if she was going to hold up her end of the deal once it was made, she would have to deal with everything that came with being bound to this boy with both her honor and her life. Coiling her once straightened tails into herself, she surprised both herself and her trembling container as she wrapped her tails around them both, shielding them from whatever force the boy thought was coming after him as he was curled in a tight ball, shaking without restraint. The age-old bijou resembled that of her image, a fox curled in its den with her cub tucked tightly at her muzzle's side, kept warm by her seemingly impenetrable tail and her body at its back. The boy's body stopped shaking after a while of silence, whilst Kurama was dealing with her own conflicting emotions. She, a bijou, an embodiment of power, was nurturing a mortal boy. It wasn't the fact that he was human that was eating at her, but the ease of which that she could do it. Was doing it. To make herself able to nurture this tortured soul, the tailed beast could hardly fathom it. She found herself thinking back to someone who had told her something that she had lived by long ago, but quickly shook those thoughts free of her mind as she had to take care of what was at hand first. Taking a deep breath as the boy basked in her warmth and fur, the great fox continued, putting aside any remarks towards her pride as she did not find this as a proper moment to jest, though it would have before. Calm yourself, kid, you're safe, remember. The mountain-sized fox spoke as the boy continued to shake. He dug himself deeper into the fur of her body, as if it were the only thing keeping him alive. Though in truth, it might as well be. Nodding in acknowledgement, she went on to explain what was happening. What is now occurring in your body is both shock from having my chakra infused with yours and the activation of your chakra network. She paused, letting everything sink itself into him. Usually when a mortal's chakra network is activated, it is done around your age for the purpose of being a shinobi. Now, seeing as how this was your intent anyways, this isn't the problem. The problem, if it even is considered a one, lies with how yours was activated. She paused again and let her container voice the question that she could hear in his thoughts. What's wrong with the way my chakra network was activated? There was more curiosity than fear in his question. Kurama thought of a way to put it in a way that a child could understand, but found it difficult having never been in this type of situation before, and decided to just wing it. In theory, there isn't a real problem. Then what's the problem, Kyubi-san? The fox's ears twitched a bit. If you would be so kind as to remain quiet, I'll tell you, the bijou growled out impatiently. Oh. The now a little more energetic boy gestured. Sorry, he-ha. The great fox sighed as she figured it was his nature as a child to question everything presented to him, and coupled with his past, every alternative as well. Pay it no mind. Taking a glance at the boy who was running his hands through the fur of her tail, the bijou decided she might as well start the process of her contract while she was at it. Also, Kurama? My name is Kurama. A three of her tails flicked, uncertain how a mortal would take to calling her anything other than her demon name. Naruto's eyes widened a bit, not expecting a bijou to have a name. Okay, Kurama-san. The nine-tailed fox chuckled at his nervousness. Just Kurama is fine. She assured the boy with a nudge of her tail that was still keeping him warm in his mindscape. That was also part of the reason why she had instructed him to go into his mind, seeing as how it was rather fresh in the underground space they both were currently stuck in. She lifted the boy with her tail and laid him back down in front of her so that he would have all of his focus on what she was going to tell him. For what she was going to tell him would be a large part of the foundation that would lead him through the long and twisting roads of his life. Naruto found a comfortable sitting position on his tenant's tail, which had him placed in front of her once fierce gaze, now turned to a softer sight. Kurama gathered her thoughts and proceeded to explain to the boy the miracle of which was partaking in his little body. As I said before, there isn't a real problem. But what is happening to you isn't normal either. She waited for the nod of confirmation as she didn't want to repeat herself if the boy didn't understand. With her own nod she continued, normally when you mortals activate your chakra networks, it is done by another mortal with an ample amount of precision so as the one being activated is not harmed. Naruto nodded. What occurred yesterday wasn't anything near that practice. Firstly, because I am not normal. I am a demonic embodiment of chakra with a consciousness. A chakra monster, if you will, albeit much more elegant. Secondly, Because of the situation you were in, I couldn't risk not giving you enough of my chakra to ensure your survival, and instead filled your chakra reserves to the brim, stretching your chakra network to the size of one twice your age as a result. Naruto nodded slower, thinking of what this may mean for him, and what may become of him because of his tenant's actions. The reaction was nothing of what I had first expected. As you know, you heal incredibly fast for a mortal. Compared to others, you regenerate almost 10 times faster than any human alive. What you, and probably no one else knows, is that this ability of yours isn't originally derived from my power. I simply gave it more strength. The regeneration was there before I was ever sealed inside you. The result was having it doubled in speed and capability. Naruto was wide-eyed at the new discovery. The whole time he had thought that his ability to heal like no other was because of having the QB sealed inside of him. When he found out about her, that is. Now, why I bring this up is just part of what's happening to you, but what is happening to you wouldn't be possible if it weren't for this ability of yours. Naruto was now puzzled. This is why it's happening, but it wouldn't happen because of this was making him dizzy. What do you mean, Kurama? He asked. Well, with the amount of strain that I put on your chakra network and body with the sudden surge of my chakra, your body should have burst with the amount of power trapped in you by all rights. An increase in breathing started up as the fox held up a human hand-like paw. I would not have put that much if I wasn't sure your body couldn't handle it. I was depending on your enhanced healing to keep you together. Literally, they both thought. The duo looked at each other and the boy laughed, while the bijou let out a rumbling chuckle. Now, that's just it. Naruto looked at his tenant with a nervous face as his laughter died. Your body underwent an unbelievable change. The boy looked with more curiosity. He figured if he was still able to do the things like walk, talk, think normally and whatnot, it couldn't be that bad, right? Kurama smiled. It's not bad at all, Kit. Naruto let loose a sigh of relief and vowed himself to be silent until his partner completed her debrief. With another smile she continued, your body did struggle to keep itself together, but your healing pulled through and actually did something that I would not think possible until I saw it happening. Do you think you can do something for me? The Naruto nodded. Can you imagine a large piece of grass about the size of one of my claws? He was puzzled a bit, then shrugged. Sure, why not? As he pictured it in his head, he found that the act drained him a bit and made him tired. Looking up, he saw a large 12-foot strand of thick grass standing tall in front of him. Kurama picked it and held it up. Say, this is a normal mortal's chakra network. What I did would normally fill this up too quickly for it to grow enough to hold the amount of chakra that I pumped into you. Make another that is twice as big as this strand if you would. Naruto slumped. Great, more work, but did so anyway and was now exhausted again. Kurama paid it no mind. It was much too amusing, and resumed her explanation. A chakra coil, which is the center of the chakra network and is where it is distributed from, of this size. The bijou held up the shorter strand, would burst long before growing into a suiting size in the amount of time yours did. To showcase that, the bijou pumped chakra into the grass and both watched as it splintered apart, unable to contain her power. Holding up the other strand, she went on. Your coil and network along with it expanded more than double its size to hold the chakra that I pumped into you. Though there was a complication. Holding up a paw to ease her container as he began to protest, Kurama continued, seeing as how there is only so much room in the body of a 5-year-old, your chakra network had to do something so that it could fit itself inside of your body. Taking the remaining and much larger leaf into both paws, Kurama then folded it in half. What your body did was essentially evolution, or to put it simply, adjusted itself to your body. The size of your network and coils were too large to fit inside your body, so instead, it compacted. She then twisted the grass to where it looked like a tightly spun rope, seeing as how it was about the same thickness as a rope that would be used on a shipping vessel. When it wound itself tightly like this, it also made itself stronger and more efficient. Like how string gets stronger the more you spin it into itself, just like I did with this grass. Naruto understood that much perfectly. He had used that kind of thing before so he could climb around all over the place. As of now, you have the chakra network and overall power of about a quarter of your GG, as you so call him, in comparison. Seeing as how you're currently barely able to be entered into your village's ninja academy, having a fourth of the power of the strongest ninja in the village at the age of 5 isn't too shabby. To say Naruto was dumbstruck would be worthy of receiving the lifelong label of Captain Obvious stamped into the forehead of whoever pointed it out. With all that being said, and with the fact that you have a much more powerful and efficient chakra system, which is also what your healing ultimately derives from, your healing is also twice as powerful and efficient than before. In comparison to other mortals, you are a freak of nature. Naruto's jaw dropped along with his nearly exploding eyeballs. Welcome to the club, Kit. Kurama added with a laugh instead of a low chuckle. Gusts kicked up by her laughter made him nearly fall from her tail as she calmed down a bit. All of that made sense to him, but he still had one question left. Is my chakra network evolving the reason why my body is hurting so much? He asked, unsure of what to make of the pain he had been experiencing before. That is in fact why you were hurting so much. As you know or will learn soon enough, the chakra network is tied into every cell of your body. Every living thing has chakra, just as the earth does. Though as for the world's chakra, that is a subject for another time. It will serve you no purpose until you master your own. Naruto nodded. Anyways, because of your chakra network having to wind into itself so it could fit, This has caused your body to take up a few physical attributes that have never been seen before. One of them being your healing, that which you already know. Another is your body itself. It is much more durable and all around the closest thing to human perfection when observed medically. Naruto looked at his arms and legs curiously, not finding much that was different from before. To put it simply, you are faster, stronger, and more durable than most mortals. Your muscles have done the same as your chakra network, for example. Each fiber grew a new one and wound about each other to fit your body's current capacity. Naruto stared at her unblinkingly. He obviously didn't know the finer details but figured he could learn them later. So what do we do now, Kurama? Am I ready to go yet? The boy was rather energetic, and with the activation of his chakra and the abnormal amount within being increased nearly threefold, needless to say, Naruto had fuel to burn. Be it that your healing has drastically been increased, it still does not mean you are invincible, Kit. At least not yet. Kurama spoke with conviction in her voice as she neared her sentence. She would hold up her end of the deal indeed and make Naruto worthy of being her container, evolved chakra system or not. Though this quick conversion back to her old mindset was short-lived as she felt similar thoughts reach her, whose origin was the very boy she was thinking about training near death, if that were possible. Sensing that the boy would do everything she instructed without question as long as it meant that he would have the strength to protect himself, and what he held dear, she made her silent vow known. Kit. She gained Naruto's attention. I told you before that you held potential to be my container, and you've proven that so far. The fox then held out one hand-like paw and cut the palm with a claw. A crimson bubbling liquid leaked out from Kurama's palm, and it swirled down onto the water-topped ground of the mindscape, collecting in a large cylinder-like shape. Us Bija have a contract. One that binds us to any mortal we wish. It is what we all once did to keep the peace in this world long ago. The ancient fox's eyes wavered for a second, before she shook her giant head. But that time is gone. This is my pledge to you. Partners, against all those who would aim to harm us. The glow of crimson red receded, and the glowing chakra shrunk into itself, absorbed into a large scroll that was within it. The giant scroll was laced in a thin veil of the chakra that it originated from. It stood around 10 feet in height and towered over Naruto. The blonde looked on to see the great kitsune motioning him over with one of its giant claws. The young blonde walked over to the giant seal, riddled with ancient kanji without hesitation. The Kurama nodded to herself mentally, positive about her choice, and sat on her haunches. Observing the boy as he settled next to the towering scroll, her tails swayed aimlessly to and fro as if a carefree breeze was guiding them. The small boy looked to the scroll and back to the being that called it forth with his own essence. He was intelligent enough to know that for Kurama to conjure the contract from its own body, for a human such as himself, was of great importance, and he would not disrespect the probably honor and delicacy of the act. Kurama chuckled, an honor indeed, Kit. And a great one at that. The proud fox showcased the mysterious scroll with a gesture of his claw-bearing paw, indicating to the blonde that it was indeed allowed for him to inspect it. He took it in, every withered line and crack in the parchment. It looked old, very old, and a sort of presence emanated from it, a vessel full of untouched and untold power. A looming feeling of fear took hold of the blonde as he looked it over and back towards the fabled fox that sat watching him not 15 meters from him. What I am offering you is something that I haven't offered any since I was first sealed over 200 years ago. This contract binds a tailed beast such as myself to whomever we choose to be our companion. It states that I, the nine-tailed fox, will be bound to you for as long as you shall live, as you will be bound to me. Kurama continued as she cut the tips of all 9 of her tails, and both of her palms as she marked her name at the end of the contract. All of my power will be bound to you as well. I won't be able to kill you, or any other you deem out of my reach. Any harm done to you will also be done to me. Any course you decide to take will determine my fate as well. Naruto was at a loss for words. Not only that, but was overwhelmed with the fact that he, the cursed boy to a fate of despair and hate, had the opportunity of being bound and receiving the full cooperation and loyalty of the most powerful being the elemental nations. When grouped into a whole, the idea of being friends with the most powerful being in existence was very tempting, but even Naruto knew that good things come at a cost. He had learned that lesson very well. It wasn't that he didn't trust the Bijou. Well, not entirely. The point was that Kurama had treated him better in 2 weeks than the entirety of the village had in his entire life. He thought hard in a very short amount of time, and really didn't want to press his luck at having such a chance slip away from him. What would you want in return, Kurama? A being as powerful as yourself wouldn't want his power being lead around like a boy like me. Naruto asked innocently. This triggered something that would surprise him every time he would think about it. Firstly, I am not a male. The Kurama quipped as her tails flicked in irritation. She couldn't really blame him. Really, she was a giant demonic fox. But still I'm female. The boy could do nothing as his jaw hit the floor in disbelief. The Bijou caught that and craned her head forward a bit. Can a supreme being such as myself not be female? The ancient fox growled with a hint of offense and anger, as her tails swished ever so slightly in an aggressive manner. And no problem with that. Naruto replied instantly, waving both hands in an attempt to calm the impatient fox down. It was just unexpected is all. the blonde stammered out as he scratched the back of his head in a nervous tic. The fox did nothing but grunt as her tail settled down, anyways. A now flustered Kurama got back to the point, seeing that there was no harm done. I only want 3 things in return for my cooperation with you, Kit. She began in a serious tone. Firstly, I am not your slave and will be treated with the proper respect, and will have no obligation to share my power unwillingly if I see no need for it. She paused to glare at the small boy with a try it, I dare you type of look. Naruto got the point and nodded. Secondly, while I am loyal to you, you will in turn be loyal to me and heed my words with the utmost importance when I ask or tell you to do something. I will not ask you to do anything you will deem dangerous to the village either, as I will not abuse this as an attempt to gain leverage over you. I have more honor than that. The she-fox spoke with an honest tone, merely trying to look after her kit, since she was basically going to be parenting him from here. Naruto was struck with her words. A sense of belonging crept over him as he understood to an extent of her intended kindness behind her second request, and nodded with a warm smile. Lastly, and I will take back my contract if I am denied this, the fox went on laying out her terms, and reverting back to her commanding presence, I will do everything in my power to ensure that you die a natural death of old age, but when you do I will reanimate shortly after. My final request is that my freedom is ensured and will not be damned to another Jinchuriki. I never intended to attack this village, and was imprisoned before I could so much as take a nap after being freed from my last container. My final term is freedom. Promise it, and we are life partners until the day you leave this earth. Kurama had spoken with an especially disgusted and hateful tone when she mentioned attacking the village, but Naruto had no reason to pay it any mind. Thinking of how he was going to break it to Gigi, Naruto bowed on his hands and knees. Having made his choice, I, Uzumaki Naruto, vowed to ensure your freedom and serve to the best of my abilities as your Jinchuriki. This I swear on my life, which will be yours if my promise is broken. Naruto spoke in an equally serious tone, though laced with a feeling of sincerity and gratefulness. He was also thankful that he listened in on a lot of his Gigi's talks. Otherwise he wouldn't have been able to pull of his miniature speech. He couldn't see it, but he could feel the sound of her body moving as the mini-gale was caused by her movement. The Kyubi no Yoko bowed in return, and lifted his head with one of her tails. I, Kurama, the Kyubi no Yoko, deem you my Jinchuriki. The Bija said in return. Taking a claw to Naruto's small hand, she surgically cut his right palm with the tip of one of her index claw. Bind us, she said with finality, in a tone and feel of that which he could only imagine as the likes of a mother's tone when she spoke to her child, ensuring him or her that everything was going to be okay. Naruto nodded, holding up his hand in a thumbs up with a look of determination in a silent promise, and plunged his hand onto the contract, next to his tenant's name. The moment his hand touched the parchment, and his blood soaked in, the all too mysterious cloak enveloped him, and surged into, and all throughout him. A searing hot but freezing cold feeling shot through his body. Needles were piercing him all over as his chakra network was stitching itself back together in an accelerated rate. With a grunt, Naruto's body swayed and hit Kurama's tail, panting and sweating from the ordeal. Meanwhile Kurama just looked him over, as if inspecting a jewel. You want to protect yourself from the villagers. From anyone who would ever try to hurt you again. It wasn't a question, but what the fox knew from both watching Naruto, and from the bond that they had just knotted, his tired form finding enough energy to scowl at the thought of the villagers. I will help you become strong. Strong enough that those pathetic villagers or any who so much as gaze upon my own with ill content, will not live to draw another breath to dirty us with. The sudden burst of undisputed rage and hate would have sent Naruto hurling back if not for Kurama's tail holding him. Having been with Naruto from the beginning, she had felt and experienced everything that he had gone through, and though she could not harm the village, that Naruto hadn't so much as given a second thought aside from the individuals he had his own quarrels with. That did not mean she wouldn't give every ounce of help and power to her newly bound partner so that they could vanquish any who dared show them anything but the respect that they rightfully deserved. Feeling the rage within himself build as well, blinking hard with his head looking down at his hands whose shape were that of claw-growing fists. Naruto's breathing turned ragged. The once deep blue orbs were again replaced by a pair of vibrant blood-red eyes and complemented by the all-too-familiar demonic slits in each of them. The fury and the nearly savage hatred and rage could only be matched by the great demon in front of him. Though Kurama would love to let her kit run wild, she knew that he still had much work to be done, and she would be there every step of the way. So, gently pulling her chakra away from her container, Kurama watched as the anger and power left his form, leaving him tired and barely awake. I'll leave a bit of my chakra in your system to help you heal. It'll let you sleep. Your body had essentially broken itself last night, and is under repair right now. Rest, I will be here when you wake up. Naruto hadn't heard a single word, and fell face first into the Bija's muzzle, out like a light. Kurama gazed at him, taking in the sight of the small, broken boy completely wrapped up in her tails. You will be strong, Naruto. I promise you that. The following day, it had been nearly half a day since Naruto opened his eyes after spending nearly 3 laying on cold concrete flooring, unconscious. All his body was going through unremarkable changes. The feeling of 1,000 red-hot needles covering every centimeter of his body was gone. Instead, he felt as if nothing would be able to hurt him again, as if all feelings of self-pity and loathing had been expelled through the pain of his trail the night before. The first things he noticed aside from his body's feeling of rebirth was the underground room of which he had fallen in. Numerous weapon racks lined the walls of what Naruto could only guess was some kind of basement, and a king-sized long table stood in the very center of the spacious room 10 yards behind him, with chairs spread out randomly in no particular order. The boy looked around the poorly lit room with little difficulty, and was welcomed by the morning singing of the various birds that were common in Konoha. Wait, the blonde thought as he propped himself up on his elbows, I shouldn't be able to hear birds. This place is pretty deep underground, and the nearest trees aren't very close to the hole that I fell in. Naruto had known for a while that aside from his overly adaptive body, his senses were unlike any other with the exception of the Inuzuka clan members. The clan of feral humans with their canine companions all had heightened senses, and made people question whether they considered themselves more animal than anything else. It wasn't uncommon for an Inuzuka to hear things and smell things that nobody else could, but Naruto was hearing birds from a tree line at least 15 meters away from the entrance of the shelter he was in. Even if he was only hearing the echo resonating off of the walls, the fact that he could pick up on the ricochet sounds and process them as if he was just underneath the singing bird was nothing short of amazing. The next thing to reach young Naruto's attention was the concoction of scents that he was picking up. Yet again, seeing as how he had a rather feral creature sealed inside of him, naturally his body took up specific traits because of that. His sense of smell was not on par with that of an Inuzuka, but now it was more than just equal at the very least. Seeing as how Naruto's senses were all natural and not chakra enhanced yet, it was safe to say that with practice, he could very well put the dog clan trackers to shame. Deciding to stop amazing himself with himself, Naruto thought that it would be a pretty good idea to figure out just where the hell he had been laid out for the past however long he had been down there. Expecting to feel a soreness that would last for days, Naruto was slow to get up at first, but found himself lifting his body from the ground with ease, as if he were light as a feather. This is going to take some getting used to, thought the astonished blonde as he stood himself up and gazed around the dark room, the only light source being the streaks of the morning sun poking in through the small entrance at the top of the stairs. The surprises just kept coming as Naruto found himself having to shield his eyes, though part of his eyes' reluctance to accept too much light was because he had been in a pretty dark hole for a while. Anyone would be hard-pressed to just walk straight out into daylight without blinking a couple times first. It seems even my eyesight is improved, the boy murmured in his head while he walked around the underground room, observing the place he had taken shelter in for who knows how long. Much of you has improved since the last time you've been awake. Kurama chimed in with a softer tone than what she had originally started off with. I take it this has to deal with my chakra network evolving? Asked Naruto. Correct. The Bijou confirmed. As you already know, the chakra network is entwined with every cell in your body. As your chakra system evolved, so too did your body adapt and improve with it. She added on in a lazy tone, her 9 tails swaying from here to there as carefree as the wind, while her enormous body was laying down in the prison of the seal. Naruto thought it over, before a question formed in his head. How are my senses so high if I'm not even using chakra? Unless I am right now, I have no idea how to use chakra though. Everything was just confusing him now. Kurama breathed in slowly, roping in all her patience. It is as I have told you, Kit. Your body adapted to conform to your chakra network, and underwent extreme changes as well. The ancient fox paused to nonchalantly buff her claws. Chakra is not needed for you to reach the level of senses you have right now, because that is their natural state. Naruto nodded with a nervous gulp, not really sure just how much more his body had changed. Though I will teach you how to mold chakra very, very soon. We have much work to be done. Naruto thought it over and figured that there really wasn't any need for worrying. His body had changed to fit his chakra as his chakra had changed to fit his body. It made perfectly good sense to him. He even think much more clear and process information very well. This is definitely going to take some getting used to. The time must have passed pretty quickly while the kitsune was explaining all that had happened to him while he was asleep, because more sunlight was beginning to pour through the hole that led to the outside, and revealed the expanse of the basement that he had taken refuge in. The symbol of Konoha hung proudly over on the far side wall, on the opposite side of the entrance. Looking from here to there, Naruto's eyes fell on everything from canned food, jugs of water, kunai, shuriken, and a whole assortment of weapons and medical supplies. Naruto pressed a hand to the seal on his stomach in a self-soothing gesture. He had fallen into an old war shelter. He had been inside this cave-like underground fort, changing, his body molding itself into something he didn't quite know what it was yet. We'll have some work to do before we can come and stay here. We wouldn't want people waiting for us in here when we drop in at some random time. Naruto started coming up with ideas of routes he would take to get to the underground bunker, thinking of how he would keep safe and secure his newly found safe haven. Everything will be set as soon as your training begins, Kit. In the meantime, clean yourself up and head to your Hokage. We have matters to discuss. Naruto looked around the room once more and nodded, making his way up the stairs and through the opening after grabbing a metal object that had piqued his interest before leaving. He did a double take once he got to ground level, because looking at the opening from the outside, the entrance looked like it was just a boulder that had been taken over by the growth of the bush around it. Clever mortals, a permanent henge. This was, without a doubt, some type of stronghold or hideout. Naruto looked it over and thought it was a very clever move indeed, and would serve as a decent cover until he found a way to better secure what he would soon make into his hideout. Setting out at what seemed to be a normal pace to him, Naruto dodged many disgusted looks after he left the training fields behind, and took to the rooftops. He hopped one building after another, heading towards his home to wash off the filth of the past night's chase and to wash away whatever pity he had for himself that remained. Glancing back at the war shelter he had stumbled upon, Naruto looked to the Hokage building and to the monument right after as he landed on the balcony to his apartment. He couldn't help but let a small, almost reassuring smile pull at the corner of his mouth. He now had a form of purpose and a goal in mind that he fully intended to meet. He wouldn't just protect himself. Now, he would be protecting the friend that was sealed within him, and the friends he was making outside his body too. Though they weren't completely in his heart yet, he knew it was only a matter of time before he saw them as reasons to lay his life on the line if it meant their safety. He was going to be a shinobi, after all. Stepping inside his rundown apartment, he put down the ebony-hilted ninjato with silver wrappings onto the center table of his living room. It had stood out from all the other weapons in the old war room, so he snatched it before he had left, figuring it would serve much more purpose with him rather than stay on the long table he had found it on collecting dust. The ebony hilt of the ninjato was complemented with a simple, pitch-black sheath with a silver metal tip. The tip of both the sheath and hilt had a strange symbol comprising of 3 tomo that looked to be spinning in a circle. Pulling the blade out, he could see the tiniest scratches on the spine of the blade, signifying that it had been used before. Looking it over, he saw that the blade was still sharp enough to cut a strand of string, which he had plucked from his shirt, in half just by falling on it. Whoever had been using the weapon had taken very good care of it if the mirror-like blade was anything to go by. The weapon was simple, but seemed demanding in both respect and practice in order mastering it even as his tenant informed him of the rigorous, not to mention tedious, practice of swordsmanship. Committing himself to putting the beautiful blade down and taking a shower, Naruto removed his clothing and took a moment to look himself over before entering the steaming bath. Looking at form in the cracked mirror of his bathroom, despite the dirt, he found himself staring at his little body. Taking in the sight of his well-growing body even though he hadn't had a decent meal apart from the occasional bowls of ramen at Ichiraku's. Breathing in and exhaling a deep breath, he stepped into the shower and stood in the steam. Content with just listening to the hot water run for a while, and the sound of the droplets hitting the floor. The steam, enveloping his body and the air around him soothing, like a warm embrace. His favorite part about showers was the simple sound of the water hitting the floor. He rather enjoyed the rain. The sunrise of the morning after leaving the war room that had served as his temporary home was rather beautiful as its golden rays crept up over the mountains and pierced through the thick canopy of leaves overhead. Seeing the village slowly light up, awakened by the warm-lit glow of the sun as if the whole thing was in a deep sleep, was a breathtaking sight. Some might even call a sunrise like that majestic in a sense. Though, no one appreciated a sunrise as much as Naruto. Having spent all night in the mindscape, the small blonde had saw fit to sit atop the Hokage monument to just watch the shifts in the sky. He was in need of more inspiration of what else to put into their personal world. He had altered it into something more of Kurama's liking. It was the least he could do after all, she had given him so much. On more than one occasion, his very life. And while he had been giving his tenant a proper home, the better part of his time spent in his mind was spent beginning his training. Though he hadn't gotten the Hokage's permission to train under the fox's eye, she figured he could get a head start. Literally, the regime the Bija had started him off with was brutal. He expected nothing less. Time, to his amazement, went at a fraction of normal speed in his mindscape. Needless to say, he and his furry tenant had plenty of time to start off his training. After spending what would equate to an entire day outside of his mind, Kurama determined that he was making progress at speeds far beyond the norm. It would seem that after his most recent brush with death, something within Naruto just switched on. He had a level of focus and natural talent that was very rarely ever shown in one his age. Naruto quickly found himself able to mold his chakra to his will. His control was nowhere near what Kurama wanted it to be, but for a first-time user, he had a natural niche for controlling his chakra. It almost seemed like using a limb for the first time, rather than trying to manipulate an actual force. With enough practice and dedication, which he was all for, molding chakra would be second nature to him if it wasn't already. Off of one training session, one of his main problems that became apparent was the tendency he had of exerting too much chakra for what he was using it for, a problem easily fixed by training on finer methods of control since he didn't need to learn how to release his power. His first step in her training was already leaps ahead of anyone his age. While she was tempted, Kurama didn't see a reason to start off his taijutsu training just yet. The boy had a sense for battle, having had to fight for his life on several occasions already. The Bija furrowed her brow from within the mindscape. From her observations, Naruto actually learned and responded in the heat of battle, with his life on the line, far quicker and far clearer than he did when he was training with her. The way he moved during his chase was as if his instincts were aimed, given purpose, as if the threat on his life brought out movements and reactions that seemed to come from someone else entirely. As far as she knew, she was the only other entity to be living inside the boy, Where this phenomenon originated from she did not know. But as it was of no concern to her at the moment, she would let it be. It had not failed him yet. As intrigued as she was with her host's behavior at times, she would observe more and intervene only when the time was right. While his tenant was going through a checklist on his body and state of mind, Naruto was stretching out on top of the fourth head of the Hokage monument. His body was a little tired, but that surprised him more than anything else, seeing as how Kurama tested his chakra coils by playing a game of tug-of-war with their chakras the night before, or was it morning? He didn't know. Either way, the point of the prior night's exercises was to see how strong his chakra was. When two chakras attach to one another and pull from the coils themselves, if too much force is exerted, it's possible to effectively pull out another's chakra as a whole, taking it and adding it into your own coils. Seeing as how this would kill her host, the Bijou merely tested his strength. Though minuscule in comparison, he gave a surprisingly spirited fight and never gave up, even at the point of exhaustion, until she ended the game. With all the strain put on his coils, exhaustion was the expectation for this morning, so the effect with his already accelerated regeneration, recuperation as a side effect, being doubled from his body's evolution, was really showing how much it had changed. It was almost scary. For the next few minutes he just sat on the top of the Hokage monument, on top of the Yandame's head to be exact. Sitting there, and just taking everything in. As if it weren't enough for him to undergo such extraordinary changes, he was still adjusting to the amplification of his senses as well. The sounds of the limitless leaves fluttering gently in the wind. The smell of the forest surrounding Konoha, and the bit of forestry behind him. The near blinding light of the orangish-red glow of the sun as it was still only just breaking the horizon. He felt alive. More so than he ever did before. Taking in the world around him, he regrettably decided it was time to go, and made his way down the stairway leading towards the village he called home. As hateful as it was, the few who knew him and accepted him for who he really was made it all worth it. He rather enjoyed walking through the empty streets of Konoha, though it sometimes made him even more on guard, seeing as how he being the first sight of the day made some of the villagers rather cranky, and awarded him an extra shot of hate, if it were possible. Glancing lazily from side to side in his black shorts and shirt, coupled with his blue sandals, Naruto smoothly made his way through the side streets, the presence of nature having a sort of comfort to him. Walking along, he found himself being watched. How he knew! He had been watched for as long as he could remember. There are only 2 periods in his life that he could not remember. One of them was the first 6 months of him being alive, and the second, his 3rd year of being alive. Why the time gap he didn't know either, but that was neither here nor there, as he had a current situation that needed his attention. Born in October, Naruto was one of the youngest of the bunch, though not by much. A boy standing in front of him with jet black hair and a duck-like hairstyle, wearing a deep blue coat, bearing the Uchiha symbol on his back with dark tan shorts and blue sandals, was staring Naruto down. Not really an intimidating sight since the boy was only a couple months older, but it was kind of annoying. At first, he couldn't care less, but it was what came out of the boy's mouth next that sparked his attention. With a voice as arrogant as a feudal lord, the boy muttered out in a smug voice as Naruto passed him by, "So you're the demon?" Halfway through a step, the blonde abruptly stopped but stayed facing forward, the opposite direction of where the Uchiha boy was leaning up against a tree with his arms folded. "You don't look like any demon, I'd imagine." The boy snorted to add to his taunt. It was one thing to tolerate ignorant adults who see Naruto as the Kyuubi. They had first-hand experience of her unwilling attack, but it was another thing entirely when one from his generation addressed him as such. "Uchiha Sasuke, I take it." Every bit of patience and hesitation gone from his conscience. Another snort, and a near chuckle sounded before the boy's next sentence. "So it seems even the trash of the village know the name of the great Uchiha." The idea and manner of talking instilled in his brain by the council members that legally adopted him when he was 3, even though he had lived with them since his clan's massacre. Truth be told, he hated their pampering, but that didn't mean he didn't like getting what he thought was his birthright. Naruto took a side glance to the boy, who did nothing to hide his smirk of arrogance. "I could smell your servant white nose from a kilometer away." Sasuke was taken back from Naruto's response. No one talked to him like that before. The most he got in the way of resentment was from the Hyuga. The two families had a history of feuding since they both possessed powerful Jujutsu. The Byakugan belonging to the Hyuga, and the Sharingan belonging to the Uchiha. Both were very effective in their areas of expertise, but for close quarters purposes. The Sharingan was the superior, having the abilities to predict the enemy's movements and memorize as well as copy any they made, including jutsu, was simply too much for most Byakugan users to fight toe-to-toe with for very long. With this possible weapon that had to be awakened first, but at his disposal nonetheless, the young Uchiha thought himself to be above all and only second to the Hokage if they weren't already equals in his mind. To say that he was infuriated by the blonde's insolence in his eyes was an understatement. "How dare you, a nameless orphan, address me, an Uchiha, that way?" As if the whole thing had been thought out beforehand, Sasuke emphasized his argument with hand gestures all throughout the haughty, self-entitled insult. Naruto was already annoyed and needed to meet up with the Hokage to address his business of training. To top it off, he had no time for the spoiled brat in front of him. "I couldn't care less that you're an Uchiha. State your business and leave." The blonde spoke in a monotone voice, though with piercing cold orbs that shut the onyx-eyed Uchiha up for a moment. Having been audibly silenced for a moment, the raven-haired boy regained himself and continued his rant. Figures, a coward who runs away from the face of danger wouldn't be able to understand the honor of being in my presence. Sasuke spoke with a smirk of satisfaction. He had been on his way to the old Uchiha district when he came across a glimpse of Naruto being chased by the unknown ninja. Naruto turned from ice cold to searing hot as he closed the 15-meter gap between the two boys in nearly a second. How much did you see? The burning blonde demanded as he pinned the squirming Sasuke to the tree by his neck with his right hand. Sasuke struggled, surprised by the sudden burst of incredible speed and even fearful that it was coming from the demon brat nonetheless. He grit his teeth and glared at the raging blonde and gave him nothing. Naruto was at the end of his already exhausted patience, and just grew even more infuriated. Growling, he lifted the black-haired boy up off his feet and pulled back just a bit. The growl never leaving the blonde's throat, he slammed him against the tree, sending a few splinters off here and there while making the Uchiha gasp and tear up as he asked again in a near-savage tone, "What did you see?" The young blonde again demanded as he tightened his grip enough for the boy in it to get the point. Gasping and now crying, Sasuke kicked and frayed, but that only proved to make Naruto's grip tighter. Finally he latched onto the blonde's wrist and yelped, "I only saw you being chased." The boy cried while trying to pry the iron grip open. Naruto just tightened it more as he stared with an almost burning rage. "I swear." Digging into Sasuke's eyes, the blonde saw that he was telling the truth and nearly pissing his pants. In an instant, he calmed down and released the shaking Uchiha to land hard on his bottom, hitting a large root of the tree with it. Turning on his heel, Naruto dug his hands into his pockets and continued on his way to the Hokage's office. "Thank you for your cooperation," was the last thing he said before leaving the seething boy behind, and without so much as a second glance. Sasuke couldn't stand it. He, an Uchiha, had not only been bested by a nobody like Naruto, but had also been made to look like a coward. He would get Naruto back for this humiliation, one way or another. It had been a rather slow morning once more for one weary Sandaime, so he was prepared for an unexpected issue that concerned the village to pop up any moment. He didn't even have that much paperwork to sort through, a happening much unknown to him. As expected, his village issue arrived at about noon this time, but it came from his surrogate grandson, of all people, who he had not seen since his proclamation to become an unbreakable will after his darkest night. The Hokage and young Naruto were currently in his office, playing a game of who can stare at each other longer while being in the awkward silence of the century. The clock, hanging high in the corner over a bookshelf on the wall that was adjacent from the door to come in, seemed to count the seconds that were spent in this awkward silence as the two didn't let up. One staring into the other's eyes, the blue pair saying that's the gist of it, while the older, brown pair of eyes were staring in disbelief. "You're joking." More seconds of awkward silence went between the two, and neither was showing signs of giving way on their stares until the silence was broken by the older of the two. "So let me get this straight." The old Hokage started while lighting up his pipe. The Kyubi no Yoko, he pointed at the visible seal on Naruto's bare stomach. He had taken off his shirt to show that he knew where the seal was, and that he had already activated his chakra network. "Made you her official companion," he continued as he raised his pointed finger to the boy's eye level while putting extra emphasis on the her. "That bit of information was as shocking as the rest he had heard, and she wishes to help you in your training as soon as humanly possible." He finished with a puff of smoke as he lowered his hand. "Not help, she wants to train me." "Only her, at least until another teacher is needed for whatever I may need to learn," the boy corrected, successful in making the Sandaime's eyebrow rise and nod in an I see type fashion. "And you would both like permission to use Training Ground 23, specifically for the hidden war room underneath it that had been sealed," the old man added, while taking another puff of his pipe. "Correct," answered the boy, who was growing a tad bit nervous in this current setting. As if he were awaiting a trial, Naruto watched as his grandfather figure flipped through some papers that were on his desk, mulling over the situation and swashing it around. The old man took on a strange carefree look, taking a few puffs from his pipe before nodding to himself and sighing out the smoke. "Done," was all that was said as the Sandaime nodded a little with a small smile playing on his lips and started putting away his pipe. The blonde was waiting for something to follow the answer. Conditions, limitations, mention of favors, nothing. "That's it?" Naruto asked with an unsure tone to his voice. "That's it? You're kidding." "No, I'm not." "You're serious?" "Dead serious." All throughout the exchange the old man didn't so much as lift his eyes from the pipe he was cleaning and putting away along with the tobacco and whatnot. Naruto's eyes never left the Sandaime's while they were occupied with his pipe. "May I ask why so easily?" The boy was genuinely curious. This wasn't exactly your everyday training regime request. He was literally asking to be allowed permission to be trained by a force of nature in a shinobi village that was attacked by the very same demon he was asking on behalf to train him just 5 years prior. The Sandaime took a second to stop what he was doing and looked Naruto in the eye, and looked as if it were just like any other day during any other conversation. "Simply put, I trust you." A moment passed, and I found out about what happened the other night, he continued as he finally put the elegant box containing the simple pipe he used and folded his hands with a pleasant half-smile. You didn't think I wouldn't find out about a rogue ninja in my own shinobi village now, would you? He asked as his smile grew to an anime-style grin with a perfect circle blush on his cheeks completed with U-shaped smiling eyes. I guess it isn't all that surprising then, huh? Naruto responded while still remaining cautious of his words. He couldn't tell his Gigi everything that had happened. Not yet. The old man shook his head, reverting back to the pleasant smile. Let me just ask one thing of you, Naruto-kun. The now grandfather figure leaned forward a bit, with a half-loving, half-remorseful face, eyes filled to the brim with a warm light. Whatever path you're choosing for yourself, I ask that you choose it not in spite for those who may have pushed you onto it, but instead mold your path into what you think is right. The old veteran leaned back into his chair, having said his piece. Naruto had absorbed the words like a parched sponge. He would not forget them. He nodded a few times to himself, forever embedding them into his mind. He went to say more, but what else could he say? It was all laid out on the table already. Instead he smiled, and hugged his grandfather. Thank you, Gigi, Naruto sounded proudly, and bowed at the waist. His grandfather smiled back and nodded, giving Naruto the all-too-familiar shooing hand of dismissal. The young blonde grew a serene smile of one much older than the face it was on. Spinning on his heel, he hopped to the balcony and stood on top of it for a moment, giving one last look and smile back. He then hopped off the balcony, testing out his chakra, pumping the mysterious power to his limbs to increase their durability. The wind whipped past his ears and the pressure from the landing was dispersed to nothing as he hit the ground, a little wave of chakra/dust dispersing along with the force of the fall, startling a few passerbys. Naruto waved them off and apologized, saying that he was just training in case of high falls. He wasn't lying. He started forward and didn't stop until he got to his apartment. He was going to get his equipment and head straight to Training Ground 23. Today was the official start of his training, and he wouldn't start off poorly. I entrusted her in your care, Ko. The tall, proud and respected clan head of the Hyuga stated in a stern voice. He was not happy. As a wielder of the Byakugan, and a Chunin no less, how is it that you have lost track of my daughter? Today he was meeting with the emissary from Kumogakure, and setting the limitations and regulations of his stay in Konoha. The last thing he wanted today was for one of his daughters to be alone, and without protection. I take great heed to your rules of privacy, Hayashi-sama. An average-height teenage-looking Hyuga replied as he bowed. I give Hinata credit, however. For a child who has only just begun her training, she is very good at being elusive when she wants to be. A headband over his caged bird seal, the young man was a part of the branch family, though he was given special attention and respect for his humble and caring nature. He also had nothing but respect for Hayashi's and his daughters, the foremost of it being reserved for his eldest, Hinata. She was a diamond amongst rocks in terms of being a good person within the main branch family, just like her father and his twin brother. Not to say that the Hyuga were bad people, but arrogance never has the tendency to breed compassion. It won't happen again. I'll find her immediately. Hayashi's escorts arrived just as the young man finished, and the clan head had to suppress a frown. See to it that you do, Ko. Now go. You are Hinata's protection for a reason. Do not make me regret making you so. Ko got up from his bowing position and nodded with forced stoicism. Clan head and servant shared a concealed look of understanding as the clan elder's escorts walked past him without so much as a greeting between clansmen. The teen bowed his head again and addressed Hayashi before taking his leave. It will be done, Hayashi-sama. The gray-eyed man suppressed a scowl as his hate towards his clan's traditions only grew. Ko was a fine young man, and would grow to be a better man than most of his main branch occupants. He was the only one he trusted with his daughter's safety, but he could not show compassion towards him. Not if he wanted to keep the status quo where it was ideally at now. Exiting the main building in the compound, Ko gave nods of hello to his fellow branch members and bows to the main branch members who walked past without so much as a breath in his direction to acknowledge him. It was in these moments that he was truly grateful to Hayashi and his brother. His father had been killed during a mission a year after he had been born, and his mother had been killed during the Kyuubi attack when he had barely made genin. At 16, Ko knew that if it hadn't been for Hayashi ordering his guard over his daughters, he would likely be with his parents far sooner than they would want, if not already. Chunin had come and gone without much thought to it. He was too occupied with giving Hinata a pleasant childhood, though he did still pride himself on his skills. The teenage Hyuga smiled, his mid-back length brown hair shifting in tune with the wind. He had grown to love Hinata and her younger sister Hanabi as his own siblings. Niji was under his wing as well. The four of them were like family. He just wished he could meet the right women so he could show them what it's like to have a mother's love as well. Ko shook off those weighted thoughts. He had to find Hinata first. Now, where did you run off to, Lady Hinata? With Naruto. So, a long time ago there weren't any villages because clans didn't get along with each other, because they thought they were all better than the rest? Naruto asked his bijou tenant, while he was strolling over to the training grounds. He had been sprinting over there when Ayam had caught him somehow. Apparently she saw him being chased by the rogue ninja too, and had spent the last hour trying to calm her down, and showing her that he was alright. Damn worrisome Nichins and their obsession for smothering you to death. Yes. As I told you before, mortals aren't the most cognitive of species on Earth. The slightest difference in appearance or power is enough to call for segregation and war. There really wasn't a reason to rush to the training ground now that they had official permission to do so. They would train even without permission, had it gone that way, but since they had it, Kurama saw it as an opportunity to get her container more familiar with communicating with her. That's pretty stupid. Pointless, really. Why keep fighting each other when it would be so much easier to work with one another instead? The giant fox chuckled after a snort. That's exactly what I've said for over a millennia. But you humans have a tendency to ruin a good thing. Before Naruto could question what the Bijou meant by that, a group of kids huddled together in a group throwing insults and rocks at two figures he couldn't quite make out caught his attention. But he could distinctly hear the cries of pain from a girl, and the yelps of pain from what sounded like some sort of animal. I thought I was the only one subjected to mobs. Anger glinted in Naruto's eyes as the demon fox within him growled. Not anymore. Running hard, Naruto put all the momentum he had gained from his sprint over to the group of bullies into the one closest to the right, since he didn't want to hurt whoever was in the center and their pet, knocking him off his feet and actually launched him a ways. What's going on here? The blonde yelled as he stepped in front of a small girl with indigo-colored hair that was relatively short aside from the two bangs that went down the sides of her face, framing her rosy cheeks that were stained with tears. He didn't get a look at her eyes. They were clenched shut, and seeing the place scratches and bumps on her bare arms, which were wrapped protectively around a little reddish-orange fur ball that was quivering in what he made out as fear, the blonde thought it was about time for the people mobbing on others to know what it felt like to be beaten. Naruto's knuckles cracked as he clenched his hands into fists, and swiveled his head around slowly, counting the number of kids around him and sizing them up. You know it's not very nice to be picking on girls and their pets. Unbeknown to him, the small girl in a purple kimono with lavender petal designs opened her bleary eyes, and stared up to Naruto with her lavender Hyuga eyes wide open in awe. Who is this boy? The kids ranging from maybe 4 to the eldest being 7 sneered at him. There were 5 in total, and each one started assaulting Naruto with the usual insults and curses to his name. What are you doing here, demon? No surprise you'd come to rescue one of your kind, monster. You shouldn't even be allowed in the village, murderer. Come on guys, get him. Naruto inwardly cursed, and leaned into a punch coming from his left so that it would hit his right shoulder. Once it did, Naruto grabbed hold of the boy's wrist while turning to his right, pushing him with his free hand so that he would topple over and make the rest of the boys go around the girl to get to him. Backing up, he scanned over the 4 boys charging him, looking to see which had any sort of training and which didn't. The oldest boy moved too fluidly for a civilian kid, so Naruto bolted towards the youngest boy who, by some luck, happened to be on the left. The boy on equal level to Naruto had no chance when said blonde leaped in the air and delivered a double dropkick, one foot hitting him square in the chest while the other smashed into his chin. Naruto missed the way the kid was launched 10 feet away from his kick, and flew into the next one after getting up, delivering a Superman punch into his stomach and bringing him down. A kick to his side sent him rolling a couple feet away as the oldest among them hovered over the boy who was now puking up whatever he had eaten for lunch off to the side. Get away from my brother, you freak. The azure-eyed Jinchuriki heard small footsteps and covered up just in time to shield a kick to his head. Gritting his teeth, Naruto pushed off his left leg and was surprised when his body actually went in the air. Having not really expected to push himself a foot or two in the air from the ground with one leg, Naruto snapped out of his stupor to swing his fist down at an angle as if swinging a hammer, and hit the second oldest on the side of the head, knocking him out. 2 boys knocked out, and another one coughing up his lunch. That left Naruto with only the oldest to deal with, and the boy he had thrown to the ground just half a minute before. His little heart raced as he panted for breath. Naruto stared down the 2 boys that were still standing and scowled. This kind of sucks. I have no idea how to fight. Kurama chuckled as her container glared down the 2 boys who were looking at each other in disbelief and anger. You're doing fine. Trust your instincts, and you'll have them crying back home to their insolent mothers. She finished her little pep talk with a smirk of maniacal glee. It felt good to see her kid dishing it back out to people who saw fit to torment him. The 2 boys nodded at each other and charged at the same time. Damn, Naruto knew he couldn't take both, and he also knew that the older kid was in the ninja academy if the kunai pouch on his belt line was anything to go by. The Jinchuriki was about to throw a punch at the older boy, but was stopped when a teenager in a gray robe with long brown hair suddenly appeared in front of him, catching both of their fists with practiced ease, hitting a few tenketsu points in their hands to make their arms go numb. Now, I know boys will be boys, but 2-on-1 isn't fair now, is it? The teen had a warm voice and didn't seem to be particularly upset, but when the boys caught in his grasp continued to struggle without giving an answer, his grip tightened, resulting in a cry of pain from both of them. Is it? Both boys shook their head no as fast as they could go so the mystery teen would let them go. No. Why yeah, whatever you say. Ko glanced over to Hinata's still shaken up form and frowned. You barely managed to will yourself to strike at me during training. Of course you wouldn't fight back against these boys, Lady Hinata. The Hyuga bodyguard stepped to the side so he could keep the troublemakers in his sight and check on the boy who had come to his little sister's rescue. I knew it. No one but him could have chakra at that level at their age. Uzumaki-san, I sincerely thank you for looking after Lady Hinata. The humble Hyuga bowed from where he was facing so the kids who had ganged up on him didn't get any bright ideas. Forgive my irresponsibility. The young Uzumaki didn't quite know how to react to that, so he just nodded back hesitantly. Ko gave him a sad smile before dragging the two incapacitated boys along with him over to where his entrusted sister was still staring wide-eyed at everything that had happened. Lady Hinata, are you okay? His eyes full of worry, the bodyguard pulled out a small bag after pressing points in the kids' legs so they wouldn't run. One stayed still and just sniffled, having been caught, while the other had tried to thrash around at first but was now face down in his brother's puke puddle with no way to get up since all four of his limbs were completely numb. It was just them two now. The other three boys had taken off. One had woken up and woke up the other while the one who got his lunch punched out of him ran off after his brother gave him a look. The young heiress was hesitant of loosening her grip on the animal who was now in her lap, but did so when Ko gave her a calming smile and went to patch up the scratches and bumps she had gotten from the rocks that the kids had kept doing in their attempt to torture the jumble of orange fur still trembling ever so slightly in her lap. Why yes, Ko-san, thank you. Naruto's ears perked at the angelic voice that drifted out from the girl's mouth. Hesitantly, he took a few steps forward and to the side so he could get a good look at the girl he had come to help. He blinked when she came into full view. Even with dried-up tears and scuff marks on her arms and hands, she was nothing less than an angel in his eyes. Just wait until you two get older. Naruto blinked again and shook his head with a scowl in his head. You but out of this, Kurama. And what do you mean by that? The Biju's 9 tails swished around in amusement as she made no attempt to muffle her laughter. Kakik, patience, kit. Patience. Ko spoke up as he dressed Hinata's small injuries, his voice calm and relaxed. I know you children have grown up during hard times. The QB destroyed much more than just buildings on that fateful night, but what you boys were doing here is no different than what the Biju did then. The Hyuga stroked the alert, black-furred ears of a small fox no more than a couple months old. There is a fine line between being a man and becoming a monster. Even for boys your age. The small kid yipped at Ko's hand before diving back into Hinata's lap, trying to conceal itself as much as possible as she wrapped her arms around it again. Ko looked back at the two boys with disappointment clear in his eyes, and held them with his gaze alone after he reactivated their tenketsu. Which are you? Naruto looked on with a look of anger as the kids ran, his face softening when he laid his eyes back on the Hyuga heiress as she calmed the fox pup down. The young Uzumaki didn't really know what to do now. He was so used to everyone chasing him away. Now he was just standing around while that Ko guy took care of that Hinata girl's injuries. Naruto looked between them before silently nodding to himself, and resumed his trek to his training ground. A soft voice stopped him in his tracks, his head tilting a bit as his ears were taken over by the little girl's sweet tone. Wait. Ko smiled with amusement as his shy little sister shuffled over to the troublemaking blonde that had come to her rescue. Kitsune-kun wants to thank you. The shy heiress held up the small fox with trembling hands. Naruto eyed them both, finding himself bashful as well, only hiding it better. The Uzumaki reached up and scratched the kit behind its ears. You're safe now, little guy. Try to stay out of trouble now. He finished with a small chuckle. Ko shook his head, knowing that his little sister would need a bit of help with this one, and a blush crept its way across the girl's youthful cheeks as her eyes wandered everywhere except the cerulean orb still looking at her. Ayano Ayan, thanks for helping me. Ko nodded behind the bashful girl, and Naruto found himself scratching the back of his head to try and divert his attention from the blush on his face from the praise. It's no problem, just doing my job. I have a thing for bullies. The timid Hyuga heiress pet the pup's head as it nuzzled its snout into the crook of her arms to sleep, exhausted from the fright earlier. You're very brave. F5 against 1 aren't very good odds. Ko picked up the flashes of anger and sadness in Naruto's eyes as he chuckled with just enough mirth in his voice to be detected. The odds are usually never that good for someone like me. Before Hinata could pry into what the young blonde had said, Ko decided to take a chance and go with his gut instinct on this one. It hadn't failed him before. Well, it looks like you've made a friend today, my lady. Shall we go to the park? I'm sure there's lots you can do there instead of just these trees. Naruto's eyes widened a bit, not at all expecting to be tolerated any longer, let alone be invited to go play with who was obviously of noble blood. Hinata's face lit up with hope and joy that her ever-watchful bodyguard had offered to allow her a playmate. Back at the compound, there was no such thing as playing for her, let alone having any friends over. Her childhood was over the day she was born. As a Hyuga, she was being raised as a clan heir, not a regular shinobi who at least had some level of normalcy in their life. Things don't usually end well when I go to parks, Naruto replied with a soft voice, not exactly giving anything away but sending the message that he wasn't really comfortable at public places. Or welcome. Ko nodded, understanding what the young boy meant by that, while Hinata thought of something else. Why not play here then? That would be okay, right, Ko-san? The Hyuga servant nodded, and looked down at his sister with a smile on his face. Of course, Lady Hinata, friends are one of the most precious things in this world. A few days later, in the Hyuga compound, it was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. The sun was still high in the sky and its warming beams still saturated the land and its inhabitants as two unmistakably identical twins were strolling through a luxurious traditional garden littered with exotic flowers and intricate patterns of color coordination and blending, the symbol of their clan flawlessly depicted in the largest group of flowers, not a petal out of place. One of the brothers with a Hittite fastened securely to his forehead, the other without any such clothing hiding any portion of his stoic face, staring out into seemingly nothing with pupilless white eyes. The emissary from Kumo should be arriving in about a half an hour. All of our preparations are set. The brother with the Hittite spoke with audible worry in his voice. The other, though stoic, gave off just as much worry in his aura. He was expecting the worst to happen. Do you think we are ready? They passed over a traditional wooden bridge that went over a small pool of water that stretched across the estate, nearly dividing it. The clan head of the Hyuga held a stern look in his face. Ko watches over Hinata, and Hanabi is with Yuka. When the Kumo ambassador arrives, they'll both remain either by my side or your own. One can never be overprepared, but I have confidence that no harm shall fall upon them. It was true, the Hyuga were not known as the magnum force of Konoha for nothing. Who better to protect the future clan heiress and her younger sister than the clan head himself and his twin, equal to him in almost every way aside from the minutes separating their births. Ko is a disciplined boy. Even if he lacks the Hyuga mindset, he will guard your daughter with his life. Hayashi. The younger twin spoke with confidence. The elder brother nodded. You mean even though he lacks the stick posted firmly in his posterior like the rest of us? He asked his younger brother, as they abruptly stopped a little ways away from both sections of houses. The two chuckled a bit, safe from open ears and allowed to be themselves for only a moment before continuing their patrol. Yes brother, that's exactly what I meant. And Yuka is frightfully deadly with her saban. She's a fine guard for your younger daughter as well. The now more relaxed twin replied with the slightest smile. His older brother stopping once again to gaze up into the clouds with his eyes that matched their color, and let a frown make its way to his face. They were far enough away, but quite honestly Hayashi couldn't care less if anyone saw. A father has every right to worry for his daughters. His younger brother stopping with him and standing at his side, they both folded their arms in their robes, pondering what may happen over the next few days. Hizashi, the older of the two, started, earning a glance from the younger. I have a bad feeling about this. It's the same as the day before Minato gave his life to save this village. To save all of us. And condemning his only newborn son to do it. The sadness and regret completely filling his face and shuddering his voice. So much hurt happens at once sometimes, and it's always the best of people that it happens to, was his only thought. It wasn't until Hayashi became the clan head when he and his younger brother were brought back together once more. All throughout the ninja academy and years after, they were kept relatively separate as the elders groomed him, and branded and trained his younger brother with the caged bird seal, instilling in him to serve the main family until the day he dies. In his place, but another brother all the same, Minato Namikaze, who would later become the fourth Hokage of Konoha, had been his second brother all throughout the ninja academy, and years after up until his untimely death. He had known both the yellow flash Minato Namikaze and the red-hot-blooded habanero Kushina Uzumaki before and after they were friends and later married. Hayashi had been there every step of the way until their end. He had the same cold barren landscape feeling in his heart that he did before that fateful day, and he was shaking in his core. Who would he lose next, was his thought. Hizashi caught the look in his brother's eyes, and it reminded him of the years he had spent separated from his twin. He had watched over his older brother from afar, happy that at least one of them could live a somewhat normal life. He held no grudge against his brother for taking in another. In fact, he was thankful, for if it were not for the yondaime, he was sure his brother would have turned out to be just as bitter as the rest of the main family. Hayashi could only hope that their son, who had saved all of Konoha by taking on the burden of being the Kyubi no Yoko's Jinchuriki, turned out to be okay. He would have sought out the boy long ago, but his position of clan head kept him from doing so. He needed a reason to associate with the likes of him, though not by choice, and any he might have sent for him would be persecuted for dishonoring the Hyuga name as well. As far as Hayashi was concerned, he could only ever watch over his best friend's child from a distance, pulling what strings he could to help. Hizashi knew all of this all too well, for it had been him in that position years ago that seemed only a day before when looking back on it. He knew his brother's pain as it was his own. Do not worry yourself, brother, the trigram twins are together again, we'll be okay. Hizashi said with an earnest tone, trying to cheer his older brother up. Hayashi chuckled a bit, and nodded in agreement. They were the most talented gentle fist users in the clan, both wielding the ability to hit all 361 tenketsu points in the body while executing the 8 trigram palm in the gentle fist's field of divination, the secret taijutsu techniques passed down to selected members of the clan. The only reason why Hizashi knew the techniques is through his own talent in gentle fist. Out of the two, he was the strongest. But being born minutes behind his brother Hayashi, he was condemned to the brand and shackles of the branch family. Shaking away those thoughts, he turned back to his brother, and saw something he hadn't seen in a very long time. He was smiling. Well, his approximation of smiling anyway. And he couldn't help but smile with his brother. You're right, Hizashi. The older Hyuga extending out a hand which the younger one gladly took and was brought into a half-embrace. You're always right. For moments or for minutes, either could tell. But both pulled back and reassembled into their stoic stances with their arms folded in the sleeves of their robes. Come brother, let us enjoy a cup of tea. And with that, the trigram duo headed into a large and luxurious traditional home, Hizashi's son Niji running out to greet his father with a hug. Elsewhere, the sound of two children playing in what could be called a section of woods giggled out in youthful glee. Indigo hair swayed and flipped as Hinata searched for her new and only friend through the trees. Golden blonde hair would appear in flashes as Naruto skillfully appeared from out of nowhere to give the Hyuga princess a poke on her shoulder or back, making her whip around and just miss the sight of him disappearing back into the bushes or crawl up a nearby tree like a feline prankster. Then after several attempts, Hinata would turn around to see that her trickster blonde was standing right behind her with his finger ready to poke her shoulder. This process had been going on for a while Ko occupied his time making sure all of his ninja tools were sharp and in good condition, with the occasional glance to his sister's smiling face with one of his own to match it. It was getting late in the afternoon. The moon began to peek through the orange and reddish glow of the evening sky as the sun was halfway set. The horizon, a gloriously deep orange glow, seemingly melting into the ground. Up in a tree, two kids who had been playing for hours were now resting while the teen below was leaned up against the trunk of the tree with a delighted smile on his face. The day had been very good. Young Naruto and the shy Hyuga heiress Hinata were sitting side by side on a branch halfway up the tree. Even being shorter than he was, she could climb very well when she wanted to. Both of them just stared out to the serene horizon, soaking up the picture-perfect sunset into their memories. "I had a lot of fun today, Hinata. Thanks for coming today." The sudden sound of his voice startling the white-eyed girl a bit, her short-length indigo hair whipping from the sides of her face as her head snapped to her left to look him in the eye. Her face getting as red of a glow as the sun out in the distant sky in front of them. "Thank you for playing with me too, and Naruto-kun," she adorably replied with her sweet and soothing voice while she pressed her index fingers together. That habit had birthed a few hours before when she accidentally made Naruto trip over a root. He of course rolled into the fall, so he stood straight up without even a scratch, but still, it was the idea that counts. Naruto nodded with a solemn smile. "Least she's not stuttering as bad as before. Maybe she's not as afraid of me now that she at least got to know me," he thought as he nodded. "It was my pleasure." Resonating snickering could be heard in the back of his head. "Or maybe she finds your mysteriousness attractive." Hey, Naruto almost choked on his saliva as he, for a moment, forgot that he wasn't the only one living in his head. "Ayano. Do you think we could play again tomorrow?" Her fidgeting picking up in intensity. "What do you mean by attractive, Kurama? I'm pretty sure she thinks I'm fun to play with if that's what you're asking," Naruto stated in honest confusion. Even with his highly intellectual mind for a child, he was still just that, a child. Innocent in the ways of mature activities and the like. "Sure, Hinata-san, we're friends, right?" The blonde chuckled. "You don't need to ask. Yes, she'll think you are a lot more fun to play with when you two grow older, kid. She'll be a fine fit for you." Hinata's eyes shot up in disbelief. Her? He wanted to be friends with her? Were friends? She asked with honest and fearful disbelief in what he said. "Why you want to be friends with me?" She had to be sure it was true, and that he wasn't just toying with her like the other kids did at the compound. Sure, they had spent time together once before, but she had never had a friend before. Naruto was at first surprised at what she had said. His thoughts immediately raced, thinking that she had played with him out of mercy, or maybe some sick joke. But when he looked into her eyes, he knew that wasn't the case. In fact, it was the polar opposite. He looked into her eyes and saw a look he had known for as long as he could remember. Fear, and that was something he had to remedy. "Of course we are. That is, if you want to be friends," he replied with a solemn smile. He wouldn't push her into it after all. He was the bearer of the nine-tailed fox after all. But something told him that wouldn't matter to this girl, not now, not ever. It was the other look in her eyes that overlapped the other that gave it away. It was the same look he had in his own eyes before they had turned cold but 2 weeks ago. It was the look of hope. As if empowered by his words, she straightened her "please don't see me" posture and held herself straighter. With a smile that rivaled his former signature grin, she nearly cried tears of joy as she hugged him. "Of course I want to be friends." The sudden thrashing movement caused them to fall back and hit the ground below them, but they laughed instead of cried from it. Even when Ko jumped to his feet and rushed over to them, which only made them laugh more, they were both too happy to feel pain whatsoever. They mostly laughed at the fact that they had fallen back so easily after appearing to be masters of the climb when they first got up there. Ko had a good laugh too after settling down. He'd halfway expected that to happen at some point. They could barely hang their feet over the massive branch after all. With the day becoming night and the moon now shining bright, regrettably they had to say their goodbyes. When asked if he needed a walk home, he instead offered to walk with them home to see them off. It went smoothly enough up until they neared the giant estate. Naruto found an excuse before getting to clothes and left before he got them in trouble. Though he did give Ko a good handshake and the blushing Hinata a hug. It might have been the wrong move on his part, he thought, because as soon as he hugged her she went completely red and nearly fainted. Which made him wonder what had been different in the tree. It was probably the fall from the tree. "I hope she'll be okay." He concluded the fall from the tree having an effect on her body. She was pretty small after all, even if she was well developed for a child. A strong body she had, but a big one she didn't. The fall must have done her in a bit, he thought, as he walked away with a wave. Getting back to training ground 23, Naruto decided with consent from his tenant that he would turn in for the night and make camp in the abandoned war shack he had made into his home away from home after discovering it on his most recent run for his life. Lighting candles he had procured over the past few weeks and scattering them about, he took in the sight once more. It was lit more than well enough for him, but it was just how it was built that intrigued him. The walls were thick with old paint, and the untouched weapon racks were scattered about the large underground hall like his candles. The center table, which he had missed the first time around, had an equally old map of Konoha towards one end of it. Looking it over, he could tell it had been a very long time since anyone had truly been in there. The parchment was weathered and the map itself was in poor condition. Only the faintest outlines could be seen of buildings and structures, strategic points and arrows pointing to what may had once been either objectives or points of defense. Taking in the finer details of the bunker he had stumbled upon, he found that there were kanji littered all over the walls and ceiling, and wondered what they were for. Reinforcing the infrastructure of this room. It was built to last the likes of me and my kind. Naruto nodded. Is this what Fuinjutsu can do? It's amazing if it can withstand even you. He thought in astonishment that such jutsu existed. The feat of successfully withstanding the wrath of a Bijou, let alone Kurama, was not easily met in the least. This is but a taste of what Fuinjutsu is capable of. If mastered, the possibilities and application of Fuinjutsu is nearly limitless. What's keeping me sealed within you is a product of Fuinjutsu. Imagine what it can do when geared towards other things with the same effort and capability. Naruto lifted his shirt and made his seal appear with the help of chakra flowing to his stomach. Do you think I can learn Fuinjutsu? Kurama nearly choked on her laugh. Hee. Not only will you learn it, but I will personally make sure that you are a master of Fuinjutsu by the time, and maybe even before you reach adulthood. Naruto's eyes shot wide open, and he even took a few steps back from the shock. Can I really do it? He asked. He knew it couldn't be as easy as learning how to handle a sword or a knife. Hell, learning jutsu and how to control chakra was probably easier than Fuinjutsu if he could guess. I promise you, your body is built for combat, and while your mind is equal to your body's adaptability to the heat of battle, it is unparalleled in its build for picking apart and putting back together the jigsaw that is chakra. Naruto was confused. It was his understanding that Fuinjutsu revolved around kanji and the different uses and manipulation of it. How is Fuinjutsu like a puzzle, Kurama? I thought Fuinjutsu is all about kanji and how chakra runs through it. That in itself made sense to the boy. What his furry tenant said was a mystery to him. Chakra by itself is the purest of energy. Some call it spirit energy, others call it raw power. Life energy, if you will. While that is true when talking about the body in conventional ninjutsu, it is not true for Fuinjutsu. Naruto nodded. So then, Fuinjutsu is more than just taking chakra and changing its flow. It's about the structure of it. That's why kanji exist. They're all different pieces of a puzzle that change the nature of chakra. Kurama chuckled. You got it, kid. But before the blonde could continue, the Bijou thought it was best for Naruto to get some rest. He'd had many changes in a very short amount of time. That's something even a healing factor as strong as his couldn't help with. Now then, get some rest. You're going to need it for tomorrow's training. Uzumaki smiled, wondering how he could have been so lucky to have Kurama on his side now. Yes, sensei. Line break. The next day, the morning had been a rather productive one, and training was really starting to get into full swing. It felt strange to have someone who was teaching him how to be a ninja instead of just teaching him basic rules of society, in Tucci and Iam's case, or treating him like the scum of the earth, in everyone else's case. He had set out to training ground 20 as instructed by his furry sensei, and was moving from one training ground to the next, systematically, every hour, and changed his pace and focus of training depending on what was there. The Bijou wanted to test her theory on how Naruto learned to do things. Of course, he could learn things just like anyone else could, but something about that night when he was being chased by that rogue ninja struck a chord with her. And she was going to see for herself just how Naruto adapted to whatever she threw at him. She had him start off with his sword. The thing was like an extension of his arm for the most part, but he's still rather clumsy with it. It was like teaching a toddler how to use a fork or spoon. He really didn't know what he was doing, but that's what having a millennia-old demon fox for a sensei was for. She had seen and memorized hundreds of swordplay styles alone, and that was just the tip of the iceberg of what she had to offer her container. Interestingly enough, it seemed to her that Naruto had no dominant hand. When brought to his attention, Naruto noticed himself that he could use both hands to do pretty much everything. He was just so accustomed to just doing whatever came natural to him, that he never noticed the way he didn't have a dominant hand that was primarily used for even trivial tasks. It was an interesting thing he found out about himself. Kurama had told him that it was actually a rare thing, that some people could learn how to be ambidextrous while most could only ever be comfortable with one hand to do things. In the end, she just thought it funny, and chalked it up as one more anomaly to add to his scorecard. He simply shrugged and decided to make the best of it. It wasn't like it would hurt or change anything. About halfway through the day and 9 training grounds later, Naruto stopped dead in his tracks while bringing out food and the rice balls Ino had made earlier in the morning that he hadn't gotten to enjoy yet. He couldn't quite pin it down. All he knew was that there was something wrong, that something wasn't right. For minutes he was looking from tree to tree, training ground off one way and forestry out to the other, looking for the source of this odd feeling. Just before he decided to let it go and dig into his meal, he got his answer. A slight tremor in the ground that barely had enough force to make a person notice if they weren't walking. He didn't understand. A few moments after that, all Naruto could hear was the struggling and failing attempt of one giant fox trying to hide her bursting laughter. What? Was all Naruto could really ask. He had no idea what had happened just now. Finally, unable to hold in the laughter that was threatening to make her burst, the Bijou let it loose. Bahahaha, oh god, that's rich, ahahaha. The sudden boom of roaring cackling laughter had the boy's head vibrating back and forth. He clasped onto the sides of his head to keep himself steady. What? What the hell is so funny? His head was starting to hurt from his tenant's volume excessive laughter. Now down to a deep chuckle, Kurama gave him his answer. It seems your feral senses are more prominent than we originally thought. You just sensed an earthquake before it happened. Only animals can sense a change in the earth such as that. You, Naruto, are truly my kid now, he. Pouting, Naruto didn't know if he should take that as a compliment or an insult to his character. He didn't fancy being literally called an animal to his liking. But then how could he deny the claim? He could see clearly on a solely starlit night as if he were only in a dimly lit room. And even then his vision was so sharp it didn't matter too much. He could hear a single bird chirp from a good 30 meters away, and he had a knack for sensing when he was being watched. Then there was his stealthy habits. When everything was laid out before him, he really was a miniature fox, just a lot less hairy and missing tails. It wasn't even noon yet and things were already getting weird. So I'm an animal now, what's next? Am I going to start hunting now? Elsewhere. So. He thinks he's going to strut about as if he is untouchable. So long as he keeps away from my daughters, I will allow him to feel safe. One Hyuga was currently restraining himself from having a field day with a certain emissary from Kumogakure. Kumo and Konoha had been at feuding odds with each other ever since the third Raikage had come into power. His thirst for making his village stronger made him enemies with Konoha after their many attempts at recruiting Kekkai Genkai wielders at every chance that presented itself. He saw people with Kekkai Genkai as weapons, and that he and his village had the right to both kidnap and exploit them by any means necessary. The current situation of having a retired infamous ninja from Kumo being sent to negotiate a treaty with Konoha, under the guise of staying under the all-seeing eyes of the Hyuga as a sign of good faith, had both Hayashi and his clan on edge. As I'm sure your Hokage has informed you, I will be staying under your clan's watchful eyes during my stay here in Konoha until an agreement is reached between our two great villages. My Raikage believes that the strong should group together to weed out and discipline the weak. A dark-haired man with a hardened body upholding an equally hardened face spoke in a tone very befitting for that of a politician, with every bit of arrogance and self-appointed hierarchy in his voice. A few scars could be seen on the parts of his body that weren't covered by the luxurious blue robes that he wore, coupled with a necklace that went down into his undershirt. Though this did not mean he wasn't a lethal ninja when he was in service. In fact, it meant quite the opposite. Bearing the title of the Slasher of Kumo, Hiroto Miura was an ex-head ninja of Kumo. His achievements during the Third Great Ninja War when he was barely a teen earned him his place in their ranks as one of the most ferocious and outlandish ninja in Kumo due to his years of service and the many bingo book ninja he had hunted down for his village. Little was known of his background and what he did outside of Kumo. His name allowed him such privacy. Hayashi stood like a mountain, daring any to try and reach its peak. He would make sure to be the one to gladly take the head of the man before him as a trophy if he eyed any of his kin the wrong way. Yes, I have been informed of your arrival. And might I add that you and your escorts will be staying in the guest quarters under surveillance of no less than 5 guards at any given time, to ensure your safety and comfort during your stay in our village. If it weren't for his emotionless and near statue-like expression, the ex-Kumo nin could have sworn the pale-eyed man was sneering at his last sentence. The emissary nodded and openly smirked. He had understood the intended message and expected nothing less from the clan of noble ninjas. He would cease to live the moment they suspected any foul play. The guards were useless, however. He had a plan. He was there for a meeting regarding the peace of 2 warring villages, and had the upper hand because of that. He couldn't be touched or kept under watch at all times, even with the Hyuga in their eyes. There was one place he literally couldn't be watched by the law of their village: the Hokage Tower. He was there on official business and under the guise of an ambassador from a foreign village. Aside from the Hokage himself, none could be near their meeting because of the nature of sensitive information being shared between the representatives of each village. It was during his waiting period where he would make his strike. For when he attends the meetings, every guard ordered to watch him would be right where he wanted them to be. Close. Of course, Hyuga-sama, I thank you for the concern. Henceforth, I hope the next week will be a beneficial one to both of our villages. Now, if you'll excuse me, I am weary from my trek here, and must retire. The smile never left Hiroto as he talked the lingo of men in robes. It was hard to talk in a sophisticated manner. He was much more acclimated to the usual language of ninja in the field. He had been ordered to read books on proper etiquette and speech for this mission, and it was a pain with every minute he spent learning the ways of the people pulling the strings. It was far too difficult for him to deal with, and was actually missing his life of just being the slasher, politics wasn't his gig. When it was all said and done, he would do this without question if it meant he could get back to his master. He needed the information that he had been waiting for the opportunity to get in order to go back to base without being made into a mince of meat. Failure was not an option. And this treaty business was the perfect way to get into Konoha. Hayashi didn't like how he was trying to get rid of him so soon, but then, that could just be his caution of the Kumonine setting foot inside his compound, not 50 meters between him and his daughters or any other unsealed members within its walls for that matter. He would have him watched like a missing ninja for sure. I understand, it must have been a long journey. Motioning the guards that he had chosen to be the Kumonine's watchdogs, Hayashi sent him away from his sight before he did something he would regret. They will show you to your quarters, good day. And I don't believe I caught your name, he said just as Hiroto had taken a step. Without a pause, he nodded and chuckled a bit. Yes, I must be more tired than I had first thought. Forgive me, Hyuga-sama. I am Kaido Hyuzen, humble councilman of Kumogakure. He bowed. I bid thee farewell. Kaido spoke in a playful tone, though he had meant the old-fashioned speech as a regard of disrespect for the man before him as well as his stature. Taking his leave and the 3 men that made up his escort along with him, the ninja from Kumogakure made their way to the guest home they would be staying at for the week while they negotiated the terms of a treaty with Konoha. Watching the filth of Kumo strut away from his presence, Hayashi sighed. It was going to be a very difficult week. What do you think, brother? Do you think they will try something? The seal-bearing twin asked in a halfway joking manner. It would surely be suicide if they tried anything, but then again the ninja from Kumo were just as crazy as their Kage was. The seal-less twin sighed. It is hard to say, Hizashi. They are daring enough to come this far. It is not hard to fathom that they would take that extra step. Both brothers looked to the clouds. So few were in the sky, and yet the ones that were there were so calm. Perhaps they just needed to be the same. We will see how things turn out. All the preparations have been put in place. Let us go about things as we normally would, and return to our children. Hizashi nodded with his brother. Niji still had much to learn and he needed to be mentally prepared for the branding of the caged bird seal that he would receive when he turned 7. He was still 6, but nonetheless, he needed to know what was going to happen to him. Both brothers folded their arms in the sleeves of their robes and proceeded to go with their children. 3 days had passed, and Naruto was progressing under the stress of the survival training just as Kurama had predicted. Fast. His body was still a little underdeveloped for one his age, but the training she was having him do along with the new diet was quickly remedying that. The changes to his body were restoring his body to what it should have been and progressing it at a remarkable rate. As suspected, the pressure of a live or die scenario brought out his true potential, and he absorbed whatever he was taught like a sponge. The Bijou still didn't know what had been done to Naruto to give him such a frenzy learning habit, but that was of little concern to her since he was getting right into the swing of her training. The last conscious thought she gave to the strange occurrence was that maybe this strange training habit was centered around one of his baser instincts that he just so happened to be more in tune with than other humans. The impulse to stay alive in animals was a monstrously influential instinct that each animal possessed. Even Kurama had it. Humans had it also, but not at the level that the boy who carried her within did. He didn't hesitate to act immediately when he felt his life was threatened even on a minuscule level. Now on training ground 37, he took to alternating between running at full speed in every direction possible throughout the hills of the training grounds and fighting imaginary foes while doing the same thing. Kurama was having him getting used to moving about constantly changing terrain without a single stumble, and the same for when in combat. After about 2 hours of doing that for a half an hour without stopping and a 10-minute break, he repeated the process in the trees. Staring up into the sentinel-like trees, the boy groaned a little. Running and fighting on a bunch of hills was hard enough. Now you want me to run and fight in trees too? His legs were tight from the strain of going up and down hills and the technical movements of his fighting and the simple exercise of running. Think about it, Kit. A predator is the master of the environment they're most suited for, so when their prey come near, they are superior and cannot be overtaken. Naruto nodded as he started to get the picture of what she was trying to do. If you master every terrain, you will be dominant in every environment, and no prey will be able to escape you no matter who or what it is, no matter where they are. They could come to you or you can go to them. Either way, they will still die. And with that, the mini blonde predator dove into the woods and proceeded to master them as his fluffy sensei instructed, not really one to challenge her train of thought since she was undoubtedly smarter than him. He pumped chakra throughout his body just as he had been practicing over the last 3 days and enhanced it. His body feeling lighter than air, his muscles feeling twice as strong, his nails now claws, and his eyes now the like of his tenants as his whisker marks darkened and were now defined as the mark of the being within him. It wasn't the same as when Kurama's chakra was flowing through him, but he was enhanced nonetheless. When he was operating off of her chakra, however, he felt invincible. As if nothing could withstand the power of his fury. But seeing as how he didn't need that power for training, he reserved himself to using just his own chakra. Naruto was never satisfied with himself, and had every right not to be. He was just barely getting back to his approximation of normal after his attempt at his own life. As difficult as it was, he was learning how to multitask with a hurricane of emotions at the same time quite well. Then again, he had always done this, Even at his early age he had to fight back the urge to pummel the villagers that tormented him, so last week was just a fluke. Shaking off the thoughts of the villagers he would take great pleasure in digging his claws into, Naruto plunged himself into the thick foliage, immersing himself in nature. From the time that Naruto had spent in the woods surrounding Konoha, he found that animals were much more sensitive to the slightest vibrations and faintest of smells and sounds. No ninja could match them. So, he figured if he could master the art of stealth on animals, humans would be like stalking a toy doll just waiting to be tossed around. Taking his place amongst the shadows after about an hour of tracking, Naruto zeroed in on a deer. It was a magnificent buck with antlers to point. Scars could be seen from its many battles with other males, and a few were too straight to be from an antless point. He had been hunted before. Keeping his body close to the ground, he stalked towards the unsuspecting deer as would a wolf. Body tight to the ground, paws caressing the earth as if it were a baby's cheek. He was silent. A few times he had critically avoided sticks and twigs that would have given him away otherwise, but he had moved about them like the agile fox that he was, silent. The only things that could be heard in the dark thick of the forest were the rustling of the tips of the trees far above his head, and the buck grazing just underneath one. The air was thick with the scent of the vegetation around, and the odor emitting from the deer in his sights. His scent was nowhere to be found, unable to be detected. His pores sealed with the chakra he kept flowing throughout his body, sealing off the scent, giving sweat glands on every inch of him. His heart was racing, but he could not feel its thundering pumps. He could not even hear the pulses in his ears. No, all he heard was the quiet of the forest and the steady breaths of the deer in front of him. Adrenaline was coursing through every inch of his little body, the thrill of his first hunt making its realizing hit on his conscience. He was a hunter. All his focus was on the prey before him, and what he had to do to make it his first kill. He couldn't feel his heart beat anymore. He only knew it was racing to keep up with his thrill. He was a hunter. He had prowled his way to just a few meters away from his prey. A silent approach. His mouth was filling with the anticipation of the hunt. He was careful not to let any excessive emotion to escape his thoughts. Animals could sense when they were being hunted. No, he was a ghost. He was a shadow. He was a predator. And he was about to take his prey. He had settled in between two overlapping bushes with a little opening in the middle of them. He was cloaked in the shadow of the forest, and was within its thick brush, as if he had always belonged. He was surprising himself more and more with how much he seemed to be accustomed to what he was doing. He could chalk it up to be his demonic partner rubbing off on him, but then that wouldn't be true. He had always had this side to him, since he was born, if he had to guess. If anything, he was growing into it even more. The deer was oblivious to the predator in its midst. It was still standing there, grazing like it had done thousands of times before. Little did it know that this would be the last time it would ever taste the noble grass that grows even in the darkest of places, and the bloodiest of battlefields. Naruto was anxious, his body shivering from the heat of the stalk. His claws were clenching the dirt like vices. He couldn't wait any longer, but he chained himself down, allowing his prey one last moment of grazing. Such a simple thing life seemed to be, so complicated and full of sorrows. Yet in the presence of one with the will to make it his own, it can be taken in a second. 10 seconds was what he allowed the deer before his pounce. Time seemed to slow to a still. How could it be so easy to take the life of something? Mortal or not, how could it be so easy to take something's life and make it your own? These were the questions that began to run across his very young mind. Then it dawned on him. It was easy because it was meant to be. How difficult would it have been had he been stalking one such as him? Maybe not the same, but a ninja or a common man? It depended on who you chose as prey that makes the taking of life easy or difficult. Either way, it was done the same. Perhaps the journey to the ending moment would be hard for some, but the end altogether was the same. It was too easy for Naruto to take a life, and the thrill he was getting now was making it all the more enticing. Would he feel different if it were another person? Perhaps. But the fact was that his current prey was exactly that. Prey. One without voice and without name. One who had just run out of time.